Texas, a state of sprawling landscapes, dusty plains, and dark secrets hidden behind tall walls. While most people know it for its history, oil, and cowboy culture, there exists a side of Texas that few dare to explore. The haunted prisons that echo with the tormented cries of those who never left. Behind the iron bars and the heavy doors lie stories of despair, vengeance, and restless spirits, ghosts, trapped not only by their crimes but by the very walls that house them. From the historic penitentiaries to abandoned correctional facilities, Texas prisons are infamous for their grim histories. Many of these institutions were home to cruel punishments, unsolved murders, and mysterious disappearances, leaving behind an energy that some claim never faded. If you dare, join me as we walk through the 25 most haunted prisons in Texas, where dark secrets and restless souls linger in the shadows. The Huntsville Unit, nestled in the heart of Texas, stands as a grim monument to punishment and human despair. Established in 1849, it holds the notorious distinction of being the oldest operational prison in the state. Over the decades, its walls have witnessed unimaginable suffering, despair, and death. Its dark history is intertwined with the state's use of capital punishment, earning it a reputation as one of the most haunted prisons in the United States. Locals and visitors alike whisper of the Huntsville Unit as a place where the past never truly dies, where the echoes of tragedy linger in the shadows. The prison is perhaps most infamous for its execution chamber, commonly referred to as the Texas Death Chamber. It was within this sterile, chilling room that hundreds of inmates met their end over the course of decades, some by electric chair and others by lethal injection. Each life ended within its walls left an imprint, a residue of fear and finality that many believe still clings to the cold surfaces and dimly lit corridors. The death chamber has become the epicenter of paranormal activity within the prison, a place where staff and visitors report sudden drops in temperature, unexplained sounds, and even ghostly figures materializing out of thin air. Prisoners, both past and present, have long claimed that the Huntsville Unit is haunted. Those who have served time there speak of strange whispers in the dead of night, voices that seem to emerge from the very walls themselves. Some have described hearing the clanging of doors and chains when the cells are empty, or the faint shuffle of footsteps echoing down hallways devoid of life. Others have recounted sightings of spectral figures dressed in old prison uniforms, their eyes hollow, their expressions frozen in eternal despair. One inmate, recounting an encounter, described seeing a pale figure pacing the cell block, murmuring incomprehensible words before vanishing into the shadows. Even the guards and staff are not immune to these eerie occurrences. Many have reported hearing footsteps behind them when they are alone, only to find no one there upon turning. Others claim that doors swing open and shut of their own accord, or that lights flicker in tandem with unexplained drafts of cold air. Some staff members have even felt sudden, unshakable feelings of dread when entering certain parts of the prison, as though the very walls are pressing down on them with the weight of past suffering. These experiences are often dismissed by skeptics, yet the consistency and frequency of the reports lend a weight that is hard to ignore. One of the most chilling tales involves the so-called green light cell, a solitary confinement cell that has been the focus of numerous supernatural claims. Inmates and guards alike report seeing a strange, greenish glow emanating from the cell late at night. Those who have looked into it describe the air as heavy, almost suffocating, and some claim to have glimpsed shadowy figures moving within. Legends suggest that this cell may be a hotspot for residual energy, the lingering anguish of those who suffered in isolation, and perhaps the souls of the condemned, forever trapped in a cycle of torment. The Huntsville Unit is not just haunted by the specters of prisoners. The ghosts of past wardens, officers, and even executioners are said to linger within its walls. Some witnesses describe figures in old-fashioned uniforms walking the corridors, their presence cold and commanding, as if the echoes of authority continue even after death. In the death chamber itself, some report hearing the faint, hollow sounds of a chair being prepared, of restrained struggles, and of voices pleading for mercy, echoes of moments that occurred decades, even a century ago. The prison, in essence, seems to be a place where the boundary between life and death is thin. A place where history asserts itself in ways that cannot easily be explained. Visitors to the Huntsville Unit often report a strange, oppressive atmosphere, even in areas far from the death chamber or solitary confinement cells. The very architecture of the prison, with its high stone walls and narrow claustrophobic corridors, seems to amplify a sense of unease. Some claim that cameras and recording devices malfunction inexplicably, picking up distorted images or unexplained shadows. Paranormal investigators who have attempted to document activity within the prison often report electronic interference, sudden drops in temperature, and eerie, disembodied whispers captured on audio recordings. Whether one believes these phenomena are supernatural or not, the stories are numerous, detailed, and consistent enough to suggest that something beyond the ordinary lingers within Huntsville's walls. There are also tales of prisoners who claimed to communicate with the dead while serving time. Some reported seeing ghostly apparitions in their cells, while others said they heard voices offering guidance, warnings, or sometimes threats. One former inmate described seeing the apparition of a young man dressed in a 19th century uniform, pacing outside his cell at night. The figure would vanish whenever approached, leaving only a cold, lingering presence. These encounters, terrifying and inexplicable, contribute to the lore of Huntsville Unit as a place where the suffering of the past refuses to be forgotten. Despite the fear and darkness that surround the Huntsville Unit, it remains a functioning prison, a place where life and death intersect daily. Its reputation as a haunted location draws both skeptics and believers, some seeking the thrill of ghostly encounters, others looking for a tangible connection to history. The walls of the prison hold countless stories, some documented, others passed down as whispers in the corridors. Each story, each sighting, adds to the complex tapestry of human suffering, punishment, and lingering presence that defines the Huntsville Unit. Ultimately, the Huntsville Unit is more than just a prison. It is a repository of memory, pain, and history. The echoes of those who lived, suffered, and died within its walls seem to reverberate endlessly, leaving traces that many claim to witness to this day. Whether one believes in the supernatural or not, the stories of ghostly whispers, spectral figures, and unexplained phenomena persist, cementing Huntsville Unit as a place where the past is never truly gone, where the walls themselves seem to remember every life, every death, and every haunting echo of human sorrow. The Ellis Unit, located in Huntsville, Texas, stands as one of the most infamous prisons in the state. A place where discipline was enforced with an unflinching hand and where countless lives were irrevocably altered. Established in 1898, the facility was designed to house some of Texas' most hardened criminals. But it quickly gained a reputation for its brutal disciplinary practices. Within its walls, prisoners were subjected to harsh punishments, strict routines, and a level of control that often bordered on cruelty. Over time, these conditions left an imprint not only on the inmates, but, some say, on the very atmosphere of the prison itself. Many who have entered the Ellis Unit over the years report a sense that the past never truly leaves. Shadowy figures are said to appear in abandoned cells, lingering in corners where the light struggles to reach. Visitors recount the unsettling feeling of being watched, even in areas completely empty of people. The prison's long history of violence and suffering seems to echo through its halls, creating a presence that is palpable to those sensitive to such energies. Ghost hunters and paranormal enthusiasts alike have flocked to the site, drawn by tales of spirits who refuse to rest and a lingering darkness that permeates the facility. Prisoners who served time at Ellis often spoke of a pervasive sense of dread. Many claimed to hear footsteps echoing in corridors where no one walked, or voices murmuring indistinctly from behind locked doors. Some described hearing the clanging of metal or the sudden, inexplicable slamming of cell doors. These sounds, they insist, were not mere imagination or the result of an old building settling. They carried an intensity and pattern that suggested a presence aware of the living. For some, These auditory phenomena were accompanied by sudden cold spots. The air, chilling without warning, often felt along the spine or across the shoulders, as though invisible hands brushed past them. The prison's solitary confinement cells, in particular, have earned a reputation as hotspots of supernatural activity. Many former inmates and visitors recount experiences of extreme unease when near these isolated chambers. Some have claimed to see fleeting shadows of men pacing inside, their forms indistinct but unmistakably human. Others report a sensation of being stared at by eyes that cannot be seen, a weighty presence pressing down from the darkness. The combination of harsh punishment, isolation, and suffering seems to have left an enduring mark, as though the spirits of those who endured torment continued to roam the halls, trapped in echoes of their final moments. One of the most reported phenomena at Ellis Unit involves the sudden, icy chills that descend without warning. Witnesses describe standing in a warm corridor when a freezing cold rush sweeps over them, accompanied by a strange, lingering smell of tobacco smoke. This scent, some say, evokes a bygone era, a ghostly residue of prisoners and guards who lived and worked in the facility decades ago. The smell is not tied to any actual source, appearing and disappearing inexplicably, yet leaving a distinct impression on those who encounter it. For some, it serves as a chilling reminder of the prison's long history and the lives that intersected within its walls. Beyond the sensory experiences, visitors report seeing apparitions in the Ellis Unit. These are often shadowy figures, glimpsed out of the corner of the eye or moving silently along empty hallways. Some appear fully formed, their clothing reminiscent of uniforms worn by past inmates or guards, while others are indistinct, dark silhouettes that vanish when approached. These sightings are accompanied by an oppressive atmosphere, a sense of being in the presence of beings who have endured suffering and cannot escape it. Staff members, too, have shared stories of encountering these apparitions, feeling sudden drops in temperature or hearing whispers when no one else is present. The spirits of the Ellis Unit seem to be particularly active in areas that were scenes of violence or intense punishment. Historical accounts detail brutal beatings, riots, and even deaths resulting from harsh discipline. It is these moments of extreme human suffering that some believe anchor spirits to the location, leaving traces that manifest as visual, auditory, or physical phenomena. Paranormal investigators who have studied the prison often report electronic disturbances, unexplained noises, and anomalies captured on camera, suggesting that some of the stories may be grounded in more than just imagination. One of the more chilling reports involves an empty cell block where a group of visitors and ghost hunters felt an overwhelming presence. Lights flickered and cameras malfunctioned, and several participants described seeing shadowy figures moving between cells, never fully visible, yet undeniably there. The air turned icy, and the unmistakable smell of tobacco smoke filled the corridor, though no one had lit anything. Witnesses described the weight pressing down on their chests and a sensation of being watched from all directions. These experiences have become part of the lore surrounding Ellis Unit, reinforcing its reputation as a place where the past refuses to fade. Even decades after many of its harshest punishments ceased, the Ellis Unit remains a locus of paranormal intrigue. Visitors report the same icy chills, the same fleeting figures, and the same inexplicable sounds that have been described for generations. Whether these phenomena are spirits of former inmates, echoes of human suffering, or manifestations of the prison's oppressive energy, they are consistent and persistent, leaving a lasting impression on all who enter. For those drawn to haunted locations, the Ellis Unit represents a stark reminder of the human cost of punishment and the lingering presence of lives lived and lost within confined walls. Its shadowy corridors, abandoned cells, and oppressive atmosphere speak to a history soaked in pain, yet preserved in memory and in the stories of those who have encountered its unseen inhabitants. The spirits of the Lone Star, as some call them, are said to walk its halls still, whispering their stories to anyone willing or unwilling to listen. Ultimately, the Ellis Unit is more than just a prison. It is a repository of memory, suffering, and lingering presence. The walls themselves seem to hold the echoes of lives constrained and controlled, of violence endured and injustice witnessed. Ghosts of prisoners past continue to roam, their shadowy figures glimpsed in fleeting moments, their whispers carried on icy drafts, their presence a chilling testament to the history of the facility. To enter the Ellis Unit is to step into a world where time is thin, where the pain of the past persists, and where the spirits of the Lone Star continue to wander, silent yet unmistakably present. Sugarland Prison, located in Fort Bend County, Texas, carries a history that few remember but many feel. Originally established as a prison farm in the early 20th century, it was designed to keep inmates working under harsh and grueling conditions. The facility's sprawling fields and labor-intensive operations were intended as both punishment and rehabilitation. Yet the reality was far harsher. Prisoners toiled long hours under the unforgiving Texas sun, enduring physical exhaustion, strict discipline, and an environment rife with suffering. Over time, the harsh conditions and countless deaths left an indelible mark on the land, a legacy that many believe persists to this day. The prison farm was a place of extreme hardship. Inmates were tasked with planting and harvesting crops, maintaining the sprawling grounds, and performing labor that often went far beyond what was reasonable or humane. Those who faltered or failed to meet quotas faced severe punishments, solitary confinement, physical beatings, or extended work hours. The farm was a crucible of human endurance and cruelty, a place where life and death were closely intertwined. Many prisoners did not survive the grueling labor, succumbing to illness, exhaustion, or the harsh disciplinary measures imposed by the guards. Locals in Sugarland tell stories of a lingering presence of spirits that refuse to rest. Some claim to have seen the apparitions of former inmates moving through the fields, their movements slow and deliberate, as if burdened by invisible loads. These phantom laborers are often described as carrying the weight of the work that ended their lives, their spectral figures vanishing when approached, yet leaving behind an undeniable sense of sorrow and struggle. Witnesses say the air sometimes carries a faint sound of chains, shovels, and the murmured voices of those who toiled long ago, echoes of a forgotten workforce that labored to the point of death. The most common reports involve sensations that defy explanation. Visitors and paranormal investigators often recount sudden drops in temperature, a cold that seems to seep into the bones, accompanied by inexplicable feelings of dread. Some have smelled the faint scent of tobacco smoke or cooking fires, though no source is present, an olfactory remnant of a time long past. Others report hearing disembodied voices calling out, faint moans of exhaustion, or whispered commands from guards who have long since passed away. These experiences are reported with striking consistency, suggesting that the memories of hardship may linger in the very soil and structures of the prison farm. Among the fields and abandoned buildings, shadowy figures have been spotted moving against the twilight. Witnesses describe shapes bent under the weight of unseen burdens, or fleeting glimpses of men in early 20th century prison uniforms, walking purposefully as if continuing their daily work. Some say that these figures are never fully visible, always at the edge of perception, yet their presence is undeniable. The spirits appear to replay the actions and labors that defined their existence, a haunting echo of a past that cannot rest. Paranormal experts who have investigated the grounds often speak of unusual energy readings, sudden gusts of wind in enclosed areas, and the sensation of being watched, as though unseen eyes track every movement across the abandoned farm. Even the structures themselves seem to hold the imprint of suffering. Old dormitories, now empty and decaying, are said to be haunted by inmates who once lived within their walls. Visitors report hearing doors creak open and shut, footsteps along hallways, and faint whispers that stop abruptly when one approaches. Some have seen apparitions peering from broken windows or moving silently between crumbling walls. These manifestations are particularly strong in areas where records indicate that harsh punishments or deaths occurred, suggesting that the intensity of human suffering leaves a lingering mark that can persist long after life has departed. Local folklore reinforces the haunting of Sugarland Prison. Stories passed down through generations describe ghostly figures working the fields at night, the sound of labor echoing in the darkness. Some recount seeing lights flickering in abandoned buildings or shadowy shapes disappearing into the tall grass. Farmers and residents who live near the former prison grounds often avoid venturing near certain areas after dark, claiming that the land itself carries a restless energy, a memory of toil and torment that refuses to dissipate. Even those with no direct connection to the prison have reported strange experiences. Paranormal investigators, photographers, and curious explorers describe sudden chills, feelings of unease, and visual anomalies when walking through the fields. Some report capturing shadowy figures on camera or hearing low, mournful moans in areas that appear deserted. The combination of historical brutality, death, and isolation seems to have created an environment rich with residual energy, where the spirits of the past continue their silent work, haunting anyone who dares enter. Sugarland Prison's haunting is not limited to the physical realm. The stories of suffering and injustice seem to seep into the minds and emotions of those who visit. Witnesses describe a heaviness, a sense of history pressing down on them, as if the pain and despair of the past are being shared across time. Some feel invisible hands brushing past them. Others report a sudden pressure in their chest or a feeling of being followed. These experiences leave a lasting impression, often prompting reflection on the harsh realities of prison life and the human cost of punishment under brutal conditions. Ultimately, Sugarland Prison is more than an abandoned farm or a historical site. It is a repository of memory, suffering, and unquiet souls. The fields, dormitories, and old work sites carry the echoes of labor that was often deadly, of discipline that was merciless, and of lives cut short by circumstance and cruelty. The spirits of those who endured this life continue to wander, invisible but palpable, reminding all who come near of a history steeped in hardship and haunted by the weight of forgotten souls. Those who walk the grounds today do so at their own risk, encountering the whispers of men who once toiled under the unforgiving Texas sun, the fleeting shapes of ghostly laborers, and the chilling reminders that some memories never fade. Sugarland Prison stands as a testament to the past, its haunted fields a reminder that human suffering can leave marks far beyond the grave, and that the spirits of those who labored and died here may never truly find rest. Huntsville State Hospital, located in the heart of Texas, is a place where the lines between mental illness and criminal punishment blur, creating a history as dark as it is complex. Established in the late 19th century, the hospital was intended to care for those suffering from psychiatric disorders. Over time, however, it became a facility that also housed inmates with criminal backgrounds, many of whom endured harsh and inhumane treatments under the guise of therapy or rehabilitation. The combination of incarceration, mental illness, and outdated medical practices created a unique environment of suffering. And for decades, countless patients and inmates experienced conditions that left psychological and physical scars, some permanent, some fatal. Today, Huntsville State Hospital is abandoned, but its reputation for haunting remains alive in stories, whispers, and chilling encounters. Visitors to the hospital often report a palpable sense of dread upon entering, as though the building itself remembers the pain that occurred within its walls. The sprawling complex, with its crumbling facades and empty corridors, seems to amplify every sound. The creak of floorboards, the groan of metal doors, the echo of wind through shattered windows. Many describe hearing inexplicable screams, sometimes from distant wings, other times shockingly close, as though someone is crying out in real time. These screams are not mere echoes of the building settling or the wind rattling doors. Witnesses insist they carry a raw, emotional intensity, a piercing cry of anguish that makes the skin crawl and the heart race. Shadowy figures are another common phenomenon reported at Huntsville State Hospital. Visitors and paranormal investigators have described fleeting glimpses of dark shapes moving just beyond the corner of their eyes, figures that vanish when looked at directly. Some of these apparitions resemble patients in outdated hospital gowns, wandering the halls as though searching for something lost. Others appear as indistinct silhouettes, sometimes accompanied by the sensation of being followed or watched. Staff members who once worked in the hospital before its closure spoke of similar sightings, figures gliding silently down hallways, standing at the end of corridors, or peering from doorways, only to disappear when approached. The objects within Huntsville State Hospital have a reputation for moving on their own. Doors open and close without human intervention, chairs tilt or topple, and medical equipment occasionally rattles or shifts inexplicably. Witnesses often report these movements in areas associated with past trauma, such as former treatment rooms, seclusion cells, or isolation wards. Some investigators have caught these events on camera or audio recorders, capturing fleeting shadows and unexplained noises, though the exact cause remains uncertain. To those who believe in the lingering presence of spirits, these moving objects are physical manifestations of unresolved pain, evidence that the energy of suffering cannot simply vanish with the closure of the hospital. The history of Huntsville State Hospital is steeped in accounts of harsh treatment and neglect. Patients and inmates alike were often subjected to electroconvulsive therapy, isolation, physical restraints, and experimental procedures that today would be considered inhumane. Many died within the walls, some from the treatments themselves, others from disease, malnutrition, or neglect. The combination of physical suffering and mental anguish has left an imprint, some believe, creating a lingering presence that continues to haunt the empty halls. Paranormal experts describe the atmosphere as oppressive, heavy with the weight of past trauma, and sometimes so intense that it becomes difficult to remain in certain areas for long periods. One of the most chilling phenomena reported involves the old seclusion wards. These rooms, once used to isolate patients deemed violent or unmanageable, are said to carry an especially strong energy. Visitors report sudden chills, a suffocating sense of confinement, and the overwhelming feeling that someone is near, even when the space is empty. Some claim to hear whispers of patients calling for help, the faint sound of chains rattling, or footsteps pacing the floors late at night. In these moments, it becomes clear why the hospital earned a reputation not only as a place of healing, but also as a prison of the mind, a place where the horrors of incarceration were compounded by mental suffering. The hospital's operating theaters and treatment rooms are also sources of supernatural reports. Investigators have described the sensation of being touched or pushed by invisible hands, of equipment clattering to the floor without explanation, and of cold spots that appear suddenly and disappear just as quickly. Some witnesses recount seeing apparitions seated at operating tables or standing over empty gurneys, performing actions that seem frozen in time. These spectral reenactments appear to echo the trauma experienced by the hospital's patients and inmates, as though history itself refuses to let go of the suffering inflicted within these rooms. Even the outdoor areas surrounding Huntsville State Hospital carry a haunted reputation. Overgrown courtyards, abandoned exercise yards, and neglected gardens seem to echo with footsteps and muffled cries. Visitors walking through these spaces report sudden changes in temperature, eerie feelings of being watched, and the occasional glimpse of a figure standing silently among the ruins. Locals tell stories of strange lights at night, shadows moving behind windows, and whispers carried on the wind. For those who venture close after dark, the sense of unease is almost immediate, a tangible reminder that the hospital's tragic history lingers beyond its walls. Huntsville State Hospital's haunting reputation is not limited to anecdotal accounts. Over the years, numerous investigators, thrill seekers, and urban explorers have documented unusual phenomena, from orbs captured on cameras to EVP recordings of disembodied voices. While skeptics may attribute these experiences to the power of suggestion, the consistency and emotional intensity of the reports suggest that something inexplicable persists here. Whether these manifestations are the spirits of former patients and inmates, or echoes of the immense psychological suffering that occurred, the evidence points to a place steeped in the trauma of both incarceration and mental illness. Ultimately, Central State Hospital is more than a defunct medical facility. It is a repository of human suffering, despair, and unresolved pain. Its abandoned halls, seclusion cells, and treatment rooms carry the imprints of those who endured both physical and mental torment, creating an environment where the past remains vividly present. Visitors who enter do so at their own risk, encountering cold drafts, moving objects, shadowy figures, and whispers that speak of suffering long past, yet never forgotten. Central State Hospital stands as a chilling reminder that the boundaries between the living and the dead, the sane and the insane, can blur, leaving behind a place haunted not only by spirits, but by the very weight of human misery itself. Jester State Prison, located in Fort Bend County, Texas, has long been a place of whispered fears and shadowed histories. For decades, the facility housed some of the state's most violent inmates, men whose crimes and tempers made them a source of constant concern. The prison's strict regime, combined with the intensity of its population, created an atmosphere charged with tension, anger, and fear. Over time, stories began to emerge suggesting that the prison's walls carried more than just the echoes of daily routines. They carried the lingering energy of suffering, violence, and death. Today, Jester State Prison is widely regarded as one of the most haunted locations in Texas, a place where the past refuses to stay buried. Visitors and staff alike have reported unusual and disturbing experiences within the prison. Many speak of dark silhouettes seen in peripheral vision, figures that vanish when approached, yet seem to move with intent. Guards have claimed to hear footsteps in empty corridors, the sound of clanging doors, or distant shouts when no one is present. In certain areas, the air grows inexplicably cold, a chill that seeps into bones and clothing, leaving an unsettling feeling of exposure. These cold spots often appear in the middle of hallways, in solitary confinement cells, or near long-abandoned sections of the facility, suggesting that certain places within the prison carry an energy distinct from the rest of the building. The phenomenon is particularly pronounced in some of the older cell blocks. Visitors describe a heaviness in the air, an oppressive weight that seems to press down from the walls and ceilings. These cells, many of which held the most dangerous inmates, are said to retain a residual energy from the violence and despair that occurred there. Some who have entered report feelings of panic, nausea, or overwhelming dread, as though the emotional imprint of past occupants lingers, waiting to be acknowledged. Paranormal investigators often note spikes in electronic readings in these areas, unusual patterns on cameras, and disembodied voices captured on recording devices, all suggesting that the prison's history continues to assert itself in physical and psychological ways. Accounts of apparitions within Jester State Prison are numerous and varied. Some report seeing figures pacing the halls, their movements deliberate and almost human in nature. Others describe shadowy forms seated in the corners of cells, as if trapped between this world and another. Occasionally, these figures seem to interact with the environment, doors creaking open, objects shifting, or lights flickering, though the prison itself is often empty at the time. Witnesses consistently describe a sense of being watched, a feeling of eyes tracking movement even when no one is present. For some, the intensity of these experiences is so profound that they leave a lasting psychological impact. In addition to visual phenomena, auditory experiences are among the most commonly reported. Guards, visitors, and investigators alike have described hearing muffled shouting, distant screams, or the metallic clanging of chains. The sounds often appear to have a rhythm, as though the prison itself is replaying the echoes of past incidents, fights, punishments, or desperate calls for help. Some have claimed to hear whispered words, fragments of conversation from inmates long gone, or commands shouted by guards from decades past. These sounds seem to defy explanation, leaving those who hear them questioning the boundary between memory, imagination, and something supernatural. One particularly chilling aspect of Jester State Prison's haunting is the way it seems to affect groups differently than individuals. Paranormal investigators report that the intensity of phenomena often increases when multiple people are present, as though collective awareness amplifies the residual energy. Witnesses have described simultaneous sensations of cold, unease, and the sensation of being surrounded by unseen presences. In some cases, entire teams of investigators have felt compelled to leave specific areas due to the oppressive atmosphere, even though no tangible threat was visible. These experiences reinforce the prison's reputation as a place where the past refuses to remain still. The prison's history of violence and confinement appears to be a key factor in its haunting. Inmates who were aggressive, violent, or deeply troubled often spent years in isolation or in cells under extreme duress. Punishments were strict, and the psychological toll of confinement was intense. Over time, the accumulation of anger, fear, and pain may have left an imprint that some believe continues to manifest as paranormal activity. Visitors often report that certain cells feel different from others, carrying a weight that is almost physical in its presence. Those who linger too long describe a sense of being enveloped by the collective suffering of the inmates who once occupied the space. Even beyond the cell blocks, Jester State Prison seems to radiate its haunted energy. Hallways, administrative areas, and abandoned facilities often feel charged with tension, as if unseen eyes follow every movement. Visitors have reported cold drafts that appear suddenly, objects moving on their own, and unexplained lights or shadows flickering along walls. Many who venture into these areas report feelings of disorientation, anxiety, and an unshakable sense that they are not alone, even when no one else is present. The combination of historical violence, confinement, and intense emotion seems to have created an environment that is both psychologically and supernaturally charged. The stories surrounding Jester State Prison are not limited to fleeting glimpses or faint sounds. Over the years, numerous reports describe interactions that feel tangible and immediate. Some witnesses recount feeling touched by unseen hands, sensing breath on the back of their neck, or even being blocked by invisible presences in narrow corridors. Others describe objects shifting in their path or doors slamming without explanation. Each incident reinforces the prison's reputation as a location where the echoes of pain, anger, and suffering refuse to remain silent. Ultimately, Jester State Prison is a place where the weight of history is nearly palpable. The walls, corridors, and cells are not merely remnants of a functional correctional facility. They are vessels for the intense emotions and experiences of those who lived, suffered, and sometimes died within them. For visitors, guards, and investigators, the prison offers both a glimpse into human cruelty and endurance, and a chilling reminder that some energies cannot be contained by walls or fences. The dark silhouettes, cold spots, and oppressive presence reported within Jester State Prison are not just stories, they are echoes of pain that continue to walk the halls, forever tethered to a place where suffering was once absolute. Goree Unit, a women's prison located in Huntsville, Texas, is a place steeped in sorrow, hardship, and untold stories of despair. Established in the early 20th century, it was built to house female inmates, many of whom faced not only the harsh realities of incarceration, but also the compounded trauma of abuse, neglect, and isolation. Over decades, the prison became a symbol of suffering, a place where the walls themselves seemed to absorb the pain and loneliness of its inhabitants. Today, even though the facility remains operational, countless reports suggest that the echoes of past suffering linger in the shadows, creating an atmosphere that is as eerie as it is sorrowful. The history of Goree Unit is marked by tales of hardship. Female prisoners were often subjected to strict rules, grueling work, and little opportunity for reprieve. Isolation cells were common, and those who resisted authority or were deemed troublesome often faced harsh punishment. The combination of rigid discipline and the emotional toll of confinement created an environment rife with despair. Many inmates died within the prison, some from illness, some from accidents, and others from causes linked directly to the harsh conditions they endured. Over time, these tragedies became woven into the fabric of the prison, leaving what many believe is a lingering energy, a residual presence of those who never truly found peace. Visitors and staff have long reported strange experiences within Goree Unit. One of the most common phenomena is a sudden drop in temperature, often felt in hallways, cells, or isolated corners of the prison. Walkers into these areas report chills that seem to originate from nowhere, a cold that sinks deep into the bones, and is accompanied by a sense of unease. Alongside these cold spots, some have noticed faint, lingering cries or whispers echoing through the corridors. The sounds are rarely coherent, often resembling muffled sobbing or cries of despair, as if the pain of past inmates continues to manifest in the air itself. Shadowy figures have been observed by visitors and paranormal investigators alike. Many describe fleeting glimpses of women dressed in early 20th century prison uniforms, walking silently through hallways or peering from doorways before vanishing into walls. Others report seeing figures pacing in empty cells, sitting on beds that have long been vacated, or appearing at the ends of corridors with a presence so heavy it is almost tangible. These apparitions are often accompanied by an oppressive energy, a sense of being watched, and, in some cases, the overwhelming feeling of sorrow pressing down on anyone nearby. Paranormal researchers have suggested that these manifestations may be the lingering spirits of inmates who endured emotional and physical suffering, their energy so strong that it continues to linger decades later. Isolation cells and the prison's older wings are frequently reported as hotspots for supernatural activity. Former inmates and visitors alike describe a heavy, almost tangible feeling of confinement when entering these areas. The emotional weight is so intense that some have experienced panic attacks, nausea, or an unshakable sense of despair, as if the collective suffering of past occupants is pressing down on them. Many reports mention sudden auditory phenomena in these spaces, whispers, faint screams, and indistinct murmurs that cannot be explained by environmental factors. The combination of the prison's history of isolation, abuse, and tragedy seems to create conditions ripe for paranormal manifestations. The dining halls and communal areas are not exempt from reports of eerie activity. Witnesses have described sudden, unexplained noises, the clatter of dishes, chairs scraping against floors, or the echo of footsteps on otherwise empty corridors. Some claim to see fleeting shadows moving across rooms, or hear voices calling names long forgotten. Even lights have been reported flickering without electrical cause, often coinciding with moments of intense emotional presence. These phenomena create an unsettling atmosphere, suggesting that the spirits of past inmates may be replaying fragments of their daily lives, forever trapped in the routines of a prison that once defined their existence. One of the most chilling aspects of Goree Unit's haunting is the emotional intensity reported by those who encounter its spirits. Visitors often describe a feeling of profound sadness, a weight that seems to press upon the chest, and an overwhelming sense of empathy for those who suffered. Some claim to feel invisible hands brushing past them or hear breathy sighs near their ears. These experiences are so vivid that they leave lasting impressions, making it difficult to dismiss the prison as merely an old building with creaking floors and poor insulation. Instead, it feels alive with the memory of those who once lived and suffered within its walls. Historical accounts of the prison reinforce the nature of its haunting. Many of the women incarcerated at Goree Unit came from backgrounds of abuse or poverty, and their confinement often compounded the trauma they had already endured. Over the decades, countless stories emerged of inmates struggling with despair, attempting escape, or meeting untimely deaths, whether from illness, accident, or the harsh conditions imposed by prison routines. These deaths contributed to the lingering energy felt by staff and visitors alike. The repetition of suffering, combined with the emotional intensity of isolation and neglect, may have created what some believe is a permanent mark on the building's energy. Even today, the prison's reputation attracts those intrigued by the paranormal. Ghost hunters and curious visitors explore the older wings, armed with cameras, audio recorders, and EMF detectors. Many report capturing unexplained phenomena, orbs of light, fleeting shadow figures, or faint, indistinct voices caught on recordings. Some leave the prison shaken by the intensity of the energy they encountered, while others speak of an almost tangible sadness that lingers long after they exit. Regardless of personal beliefs, it is difficult to ignore the consistency of reports describing apparitions, cold spots, and auditory phenomena throughout the prison. Ultimately, Goree Unit is a place where history and haunting intersect. The corridors, cells, and communal areas are not simply remnants of a functioning prison. They are vessels for decades of human suffering, despair, and unfulfilled lives. The female spirits said to roam the halls serve as reminders of the hardships faced by those who were incarcerated here, a testament to the weight of loneliness and trauma that cannot easily be erased. Visitors and staff alike continue to report experiences that defy explanation: chilling drafts, fleeting figures, muffled cries, and an oppressive, emotional presence that seems to inhabit every corner. Goree Unit stands as more than just a prison. It is a repository of memory and pain, a space where the echoes of the past are never truly silent. The cries of those who suffered linger in the corridors, the shadowy figures walk the halls, and the oppressive energy presses down on anyone who dares enter. To walk the grounds of Goree Unit is to step into a history of sorrow and endurance, to encounter spirits trapped between life and death, and to witness the lingering effects of human suffering that refuse to fade into the shadows. The Texas State Penitentiary at Beeville, located in southern Texas, has a history steeped in violence, punishment, and whispered tales of unrest. Established decades ago to house some of the state's most dangerous inmates, the facility quickly gained a reputation for brutal discipline and frequent altercations among prisoners. Over the years, it became notorious for the intensity of its conflicts, the harshness of its guards, and the long hours spent in isolation. Today, long after some wings have been abandoned and routines have changed, Beeville remains a place where the past is said to linger, leaving a chilling imprint on those who dare to step inside. Visitors to Beeville often report experiences that defy explanation. The prison's history of violence and confinement seems to manifest as physical sensations, strange sounds, and fleeting visual phenomena. Some speak of sudden, inexplicable pushes, as though invisible hands are attempting to move or warn them. Others describe whispered threats carried on the air, phrases that vanish as quickly as they appear, but leave an unmistakable sense of menace. These phenomena are often reported in areas associated with the prison's solitary confinement cells or older wings, spaces where prisoners spent hours, days, or even weeks in isolation, often under conditions of extreme stress and fear. The solitary confinement cells are widely regarded as the most active areas of the prison. Many witnesses report seeing shadowy figures moving within the small, oppressive spaces. Figures that vanish when approached, yet seem to watch silently from the darkness. Some claim to witness the apparitions of inmates still shackled, their postures frozen in restraint, their presence a lingering echo of the punishments they endured. Guards who worked in these areas have reported hearing the rattling of chains, doors creaking open and shut, or the soft, mournful sounds of a prisoner calling out in anguish. The intensity of these experiences suggests that the emotional residue of confinement and suffering has left an enduring mark on the prison itself. Beyond the cells, the hallways and common areas also carry a reputation for unexplained activity. Visitors have described sudden drops in temperature, chills that appear out of nowhere, and the sensation of being watched, even in broad, well-lit spaces. Some report hearing the footsteps of someone walking behind them, only to turn and find the corridor empty. Doors sometimes swing open or shut without warning, and lights flicker as if reacting to an unseen presence. These occurrences, though subtle at times, often contribute to a pervasive feeling of unease, a reminder that the energy of the past is never truly gone. Auditory phenomena are among the most commonly reported experiences at Beeville. Whispers echo through empty hallways, soft murmurs that seem to originate from no one in particular, yet carry a tone of warning or anger. Some visitors have reported hearing the clanking of metal chains, the harsh commands of guards, or distant shouting that appears to replay historical moments of unrest. Paranormal investigators who have entered the facility often capture distorted voices on audio recordings, unexplained knocks, or faint sounds of doors slamming, further reinforcing the idea that the prison's violent history continues to resonate in the present. Shadowy figures are another frequent occurrence. Witnesses describe dark silhouettes that move along the edges of vision, appearing to vanish when directly observed. Some figures seem fully formed, resembling inmates from past decades with their prison uniforms and stiff postures, while others are more amorphous, suggesting a presence that is less human and more residual energy. Certain witnesses report seeing figures pacing in abandoned cell blocks, sitting on old bunks, or standing silently at the end of corridors, as if reliving routines from their former lives. These visual phenomena are often accompanied by a chilling heaviness in the air, as though the emotional weight of suffering presses down on anyone nearby. Even the outside grounds of the penitentiary hold their share of eerie activity. Visitors walking the perimeter have reported fleeting shadows, sudden gusts of cold wind in still air, and unexplained sounds echoing across the compound. Some claim to see figures moving along the outer fences or standing near old guard towers, only to disappear when approached. These experiences suggest that the haunting is not confined to the interior of the prison, but extends across the landscape, carrying with it the echoes of violence, confinement, and despair that once defined life at Beeville. The prison's reputation is also bolstered by historical accounts of unrest and tragedy. Beeville was home to frequent violent incidents, from inmate altercations to confrontations with guards. Punishments were strict, and solitary confinement was used extensively to control behavior, sometimes for prolonged periods. The combination of physical and psychological trauma created an environment where suffering accumulated over time, leaving a residual presence that some believe has manifested as the ghostly phenomena reported today. Many of the hauntings are thought to be connected to these areas of greatest distress, where pain and fear were most intensely experienced. Those who explore Beeville often describe the prison as oppressive, not only because of its architecture, but because of the lingering energy that fills its halls. Cold drafts, sudden pressures, and invisible touches create a constant reminder of the facility's dark past. Visitors recount feeling watched, guided, or even subtly pushed away from certain areas, as though unseen forces are enforcing boundaries or communicating warnings. In some cases, people have left the prison visibly shaken, deeply affected by the overwhelming emotional weight that seems to hang in the air. Ultimately, the Texas State Penitentiary at Beeville is a place where history refuses to remain silent. The walls, hallways, and solitary confinement cells are not simply remnants of a working prison. They are vessels for decades of suffering, fear, and unresolved anguish. Apparitions of chained inmates, whispered threats, sudden chills, and invisible touches all point to a lingering presence. A collection of energies left behind by those who lived, struggled, and sometimes died within the penitentiary. For those who enter, the experience is more than a brush with the past. It is a chilling encounter with the forgotten whispers of human pain, echoing endlessly through the halls of a prison that remembers far more than it should. Ramsey Unit, located in Brazoria County, Texas, carries a reputation that is as grim as it is enduring. Built decades ago to house some of the state's most difficult and dangerous inmates, the prison quickly became known for its extreme labor practices, harsh discipline, and frequent unrest among those confined within its walls. For generations, inmates endured long days of grueling labor under strict supervision, facing punishments that ranged from solitary confinement to extended physical labor in unforgiving conditions. Over time, the intensity of the suffering left a lasting mark, not only on the lives of the prisoners, but, some believe, on the very structure of the prison itself. Today, Ramsey Unit stands as a place where the past refuses to rest, and many who enter report experiencing the shadows of those who suffered within its confines. Ghost hunters and visitors alike describe Ramsey as a location thick with energy, an atmosphere heavy with the echoes of pain and despair. The prison's deserted wings, in particular, seem to be hotspots for paranormal activity. Visitors have reported hearing strange chants, low murmurs, and footsteps that echo along empty corridors. These sounds are often described as eerily rhythmic, as though the prison itself is replaying fragments of daily life from decades past. Guards pacing, inmates marching to work, or whispered exchanges between prisoners hidden from supervision. Some witnesses even claim to hear the faint clanging of tools and machinery, reminiscent of the hard labor that defined life within the prison. The older cell blocks, long abandoned and falling into disrepair, are often the most active areas for reported phenomena. Shadowy figures are commonly seen moving through the hallways or standing silently in the corners of cells, disappearing when approached. Many of these apparitions are described as indistinct silhouettes, yet they carry a presence that is palpable and oppressive. Visitors often report a heavy weight in the air, a sense of being watched, or sudden feelings of dread when entering these areas. Some say that the energy is so intense that it can physically affect those who linger too long, causing chills, nausea, or a deep emotional unease that mirrors the suffering once endured by inmates in the prison. One of the most chilling aspects of Ramsey Unit is the experience of auditory phenomena. Whispers, chants, and murmurs are reported with startling regularity, often occurring in places where the prison's past acts of cruelty were most concentrated. Visitors have described hearing fragments of conversations, shouts of anger, or prayers and chants repeated in rhythms that suggest groups of inmates long gone. Footsteps frequently accompany these sounds, pacing along hallways, entering and exiting rooms, or circling the perimeters of cell blocks. For those sensitive to the paranormal, these audio experiences create an overwhelming impression of a presence that refuses to remain invisible, of memories of the past pressing insistently into the present. The prison's labor yards and work areas are also significant in the tales of haunting. Inmates were required to endure extreme physical labor, often under the watchful eyes of strict guards who enforced rules with unrelenting severity. Stories of exhaustion, punishment, and despair permeate the historical accounts of the prison. Today, visitors report feeling sudden gusts of cold wind in these outdoor areas, or the faint sensation of invisible hands brushing past as they walk across the yards. Some claim to see shadowy figures carrying imaginary tools, walking as if performing a task that ended decades ago, forever trapped in a cycle of labor. The persistence of these manifestations suggests that the suffering of the past has left a residue that continues to interact with the living. Even the prison's administrative and communal areas are not exempt from reports of paranormal activity. Lights flicker inexplicably, doors open and close without human interaction, and chairs or other objects appear to move on their own. Witnesses often describe an oppressive atmosphere that seems to intensify in areas where punishment or confrontation historically occurred. Many ghost hunters note that the energy seems more concentrated in darker corners or sections of the prison that were used for isolation or discipline. The combination of neglect, cruelty, and prolonged suffering appears to have created a lingering presence that is both intelligent and emotionally charged, manifesting in ways that are often difficult to explain. The emotional intensity of Ramsey Unit's haunting is perhaps what sets it apart. Visitors often report feeling a profound sadness, a heavy emotional pressure that seems to emanate from the walls themselves. Some describe feeling invisible eyes tracking their movements, or the sensation of unseen hands pressing down on shoulders and backs. Others recount experiencing a sudden emotional resonance with the experiences of inmates long gone, a connection so strong that it leaves them emotionally drained after leaving the prison. Paranormal investigators often attribute these sensations to residual energy from decades of suffering, anger, and despair, a kind of imprint left by those who never found peace in life. Many local legends reinforce the haunted reputation of Ramsey Unit. Stories of violent altercations, riots, and deaths are interwoven with accounts of spectral figures, disembodied voices, and inexplicable sensations reported by generations of staff, inmates, and visitors. Shadowy figures pacing hallways, whispers echoing through empty corridors, and sudden cold spots are not isolated occurrences. They are repeated experiences that collectively form a pattern of paranormal activity consistent with the prison's dark history. Each account adds to the impression that the prison itself is a repository of human suffering, a place where the echoes of the past are never fully silenced. Ultimately, Rusk Unit is more than just a correctional facility. It is a monument to the weight of human suffering and the persistence of memory. Its walls, cells, labor yards, and abandoned wings are vessels for decades of intense emotion, physical exertion, and despair. The shadows of the past linger in the corners, moving silently, whispering in echoes, and pressing down with the weight of the lives once confined within. Visitors, ghost hunters, and those who dare to explore the prison find themselves in a space where history is alive, where the energy of past suffering persists, and where the spirits of inmates who never found peace continue to wander unseen but undeniably present. Rusk Unit remains a place where the living are confronted by the remnants of the past. A prison where the echoes of labor, punishment, and anguish refuse to fade. The chants, footsteps, shadowy figures, and oppressive energy all serve as reminders that the human spirit, even in suffering, leaves an enduring mark on the world. For those who walk its corridors today, Rusk Unit offers a chilling glimpse into a history of pain and despair. A haunting testament to lives once lived under harsh rules, and the lingering presence of souls that have never truly found rest. Huntsville Walls, home to Texas's oldest and most infamous execution chamber, is a place where life and death intersect in ways both terrifying and mysterious. For decades, the facility has been the site of hundreds of state-sanctioned executions, a grim record that has earned it a reputation unlike any other in the country. Within its walls, the final moments of countless inmates were carried out, often with a stark efficiency that left little room for comfort, compassion, or dignity. Over time, the energy of those moments, the fear, despair, and finality, has left an indelible mark, leading many to believe that the spirits of the executed, as well as those who oversaw the process, remain tethered to the very walls themselves. Visitors and staff report experiences that defy explanation, particularly in and around the execution chamber. Sudden cold spots are among the most common phenomena, often appearing without warning and persisting for several minutes. Some witnesses describe feeling an intense drop in temperature that chills them to the bone, a sensation that seems to emanate from the chamber itself. The cold is accompanied by an oppressive emotional weight, a sense of being watched or pressed upon, as though unseen eyes are observing every movement. These physical sensations are frequently reported alongside auditory anomalies, creating a multi-sensory experience that is difficult to dismiss. Disembodied voices are another hallmark of the haunting at Huntsville Walls. Many visitors describe hearing whispers, murmurs, or fragmented phrases, sometimes indistinct, sometimes sharply clear. Some voices seem to echo the final words of inmates, while others resemble commands or instructions that might have been issued by prison officials. The sounds are often heard in empty corridors or in the immediate vicinity of the execution chamber, lending an eerie authenticity to the experience. Paranormal investigators have captured these voices on audio devices, and while skeptics may attribute them to acoustics or suggestion, the sheer consistency of reports over decades suggests something far more compelling. Shadowy figures have been observed by both visitors and staff, adding a visual element to the prison's ghostly reputation. Some figures appear to move silently along the hallways, their forms fleeting and indistinct, while others are seen standing still, as if frozen in the act of observation. In the execution chamber itself, witnesses have reported seeing shapes that resemble human forms, often appearing in the corners or near the observation area. These figures are not always identifiable as either inmates or staff, suggesting a blending of presences. Perhaps a residual energy left by both those who were executed and those who carried out the sentences. The execution chamber has always been a place of tension, fear, and anticipation, and it is within this room that many of the reported phenomena concentrate. Accounts describe the atmosphere as heavy and suffocating, filled with a sense of finality that seems to linger long after the chamber is empty. Some visitors have reported seeing fleeting apparitions of individuals lying on the gurney or watching from the observation areas, their forms disappearing when approached. Others describe a sudden, inexplicable heaviness in the air, a feeling that seems to press down on the chest and shoulders, as if the emotions of hundreds of past executions are attempting to communicate or manifest physically. Even outside the chamber, the walls of Huntsville carry a dark reputation. Hallways leading to and from the execution area are often described as echoing with phantom footsteps, faint murmurs, and the occasional metallic clanging reminiscent of chains or restraints. Some witnesses report the sensation of being followed, feeling invisible hands brush past them, or catching glimpses of figures disappearing around corners. These experiences are not limited to those with an interest in the paranormal. Correctional officers and maintenance staff have independently described similar occurrences, suggesting that the haunting extends beyond mere curiosity or storytelling. Historical accounts provide a chilling context for the paranormal reports. Huntsville Walls has been the site of hundreds of executions carried out over the decades, each event a moment of intense human emotion, whether fear, grief, or relief. The prison officials who administered these executions bore witness to countless final moments, their own presence inseparably linked to the act of ending life. Some believe that the combination of intense emotions from both inmates and staff created an energy so potent that it has imprinted itself upon the physical structure. The residual effect may be what manifests today as cold spots, voices, and apparitions, echoes of events that remain impossible to erase completely. Visitors to Huntsville Walls often report a profound psychological impact beyond the physical manifestations of haunting. Many describe an overwhelming sense of sadness, anxiety, or reverence when entering areas associated with executions. The emotional weight seems to hang in the air, pressing down on anyone present and creating a shared sense of the gravity of life and death. Even seasoned paranormal investigators admit that the intensity of the energy can be difficult to withstand for extended periods, often requiring breaks to recover from the oppressive atmosphere. Some of the most chilling reports involve interactions that feel immediate and personal. Witnesses describe objects moving on their own, a chair sliding slightly across the floor, doors clicking shut without reason, or tools used in the chamber appearing displaced. Others recount feeling a sudden, invisible pressure, like a hand resting on their shoulder, or hearing a whispered word in the ear, despite being completely alone. These experiences reinforce the idea that Huntsville Walls is not merely a historical site, but a place where the past continues to assert itself in tangible ways. Ultimately, Huntsville Walls is more than a prison execution chamber. It is a repository of human emotion, memory, and unresolved energy. The walls, hallways, and chamber itself bear the imprints of fear, despair, and finality, creating an environment where the echoes of life and death converge. Shadowy figures, sudden cold spots, disembodied voices, and the oppressive atmosphere all point to the lingering presence of those who experienced the finality of existence within these walls. For those who enter, Huntsville Walls offers a chilling reminder that the past is never truly gone, and that the act of taking a life, however sanctioned by law, leaves a mark that may linger for eternity. Huntsville Walls stands as a testament to the gravity of human mortality, the emotional intensity of execution, and the possibility that the spirits of the past refuse to fade quietly. Each cold draft, whispered word, and fleeting shadow is a reminder that these walls have witnessed the most extreme of human experiences, and that the echoes of those moments continue to resonate, haunting the living long after the gurney has been cleared and the chamber emptied. Briscoe Unit, located deep within the heart of Texas, is a prison with a reputation steeped in mystery, sorrow, and fear. For decades, it has housed some of the state's most troubled and dangerous inmates, many of whom endured extreme punishment, grueling labor, and strict confinement. The prison's history is marked by violence, unrest, and despair, and over time, these experiences seem to have left an indelible mark on the structure itself. Today, Briscoe Unit is often spoken of not just as a correctional facility, but as a place where the very walls remember every scream, every act of suffering, and every fleeting moment of terror. Visitors, staff, and paranormal investigators alike have reported experiences that suggest the presence of tormented souls lingering long after their physical lives ended. The phenomenon at Rusk Unit begins with a pervasive feeling of unease. Many who enter report the sensation of being watched, as if unseen eyes are tracking every movement. Corridors and cell blocks seem to exude an oppressive weight, pressing down on those who pass through. This feeling is often accompanied by sudden, inexplicable chills, which appear in the middle of hallways, in isolation cells, or near the barred windows that once held inmates in prolonged confinement. These cold spots are not fleeting drafts or air conditioning quirks. They are intense, almost tactile manifestations of presence, as though the prison itself is alive with the residual energy of past suffering. Sometimes the whispers seem to call out names, fragments of conversations, or muffled cries of anger and despair. In certain areas of the prison, particularly the older wings and solitary confinement cells, these voices become almost deafening, overlapping in layers that suggest a multitude of presences. Staff members who have spent years working at Rusk Unit have recounted similar experiences, hearing faint voices when no one is present, or feeling an intense emotional energy that cannot be explained by natural causes. Shadowy figures are commonly reported, their presence adding a visual element to the haunting. Witnesses often describe fleeting images of long-dead inmates staring from barred windows or pacing silently in corridors. Some apparitions appear fully formed, while others are indistinct silhouettes, shifting and dissolving as if trapped between dimensions. These figures are often accompanied by sudden temperature drops or an oppressive atmosphere, giving the impression that the prison's emotional energy is concentrated in specific areas. Paranormal investigators have captured some of these figures on cameras, though often they vanish before they can be fully examined, leaving only a lingering sense of unease. The prison's solitary confinement cells are considered hotspots for supernatural activity. Inmates who spent long periods in isolation often suffered extreme psychological stress, and many reportedly met violent or tragic ends within these cramped spaces. Visitors report feeling an overwhelming emotional pressure in these cells, a sense of despair so profound that it manifests physically: nausea, headaches, and an almost suffocating heaviness. Some witnesses describe sudden touches, as if unseen hands are pressing against their backs or shoulders, while others hear faint scratching or the rattling of chains. These experiences are often intense and lasting, leaving those who encounter them shaken and deeply affected. Beyond the cells, the communal areas of Rusk Unit also exhibit signs of paranormal activity. Hallways echo with phantom footsteps, chairs appear to move on their own, and doors swing open or shut without explanation. Some witnesses describe hearing the sounds of old routines replaying, the shuffle of inmates marching to labor, the clanging of metal, or the voices of guards issuing commands long past. These phenomena create an immersive sense that the prison is not merely a building, but a vessel for memory, a structure that retains the emotional energy of its violent and sorrowful history. Historical accounts of Rusk Unit provide chilling context for the hauntings. The prison was designed to enforce strict discipline, often through harsh physical and psychological methods. Altercations among inmates were common, and punishments were severe. The combination of fear, anger, and suffering created an environment where the emotions of the living became etched into the very fabric of the prison. Many believe that this intense emotional residue is the source of the supernatural occurrences reported today: phantoms, cold spots, whispers, and the overwhelming sense of being watched. Even the outdoor areas surrounding Rusk Unit are not immune to reports of haunting. Visitors have described seeing figures move silently along the perimeter, sometimes pausing near old guard towers or abandoned sections of the grounds. Others report sudden changes in temperature, fleeting shadows, or the sensation of being followed across empty yards. These experiences suggest that the prison's energy is not confined to its interior, but radiates outward, carrying with it the echoes of anguish, punishment, and fear that defined life within its walls. The cumulative effect of these experiences is a pervasive sense of tormented souls lingering in every corner of Rusk Unit. Visitors often describe an emotional impact that is almost tangible, a mix of sadness, fear, and empathy for the individuals who endured decades of hardship. Ghost hunters have consistently noted that the intensity of these phenomena often increases in areas where historical incidents of suffering were concentrated, reinforcing the belief that the prison itself is imprinted with the emotional weight of its past. Ultimately, Rusk Unit serves as more than a correctional facility. It is a monument to human suffering and a reminder that the past is never truly silent. The walls, corridors, cells, and outdoor grounds act as vessels for the memories and emotions of those who lived and often suffered within them. Shadowy figures, whispered voices, sudden cold spots, and the sensation of unseen hands pressing down on visitors all testified to a haunting that is as psychological as it is supernatural. Rusk Unit stands as a somber reminder that structures can carry memory, that pain can leave lasting traces, and that the echoes of torment may continue to haunt long after the individuals themselves are gone. Every scream, every whisper, every moment of despair seems to have been absorbed into the prison's walls, leaving a presence that continues to resonate with those who dare to enter. To walk its corridors is to step into a world where the past remains vividly alive, a place where the tormented souls of inmates long departed continue to watch, whisper, and linger, their suffering etched forever into the shadows. Rusk Unit sits in the lonely expanse of Texas countryside, its walls cracked and its gates rusted shut. Once alive with the noise of guards, prisoners, and the endless clatter of iron, it now lies silent except for the whispers that drift through the wind. For decades, this prison held some of the most violent and desperate men in the state. Time has reduced it to a decaying shell, but locals swear the energy inside never left. On certain nights, the stillness breaks with the sounds of chains clanging, doors slamming, and anguished cries echoing through the corridors. The prison's history is steeped in violence. Built in the early 20th century, Rusk Unit was designed for hard labor and strict discipline. Inmates were worked to exhaustion under the punishing Texas sun, their hands blistered and their backs scarred by the weight of expectation and cruelty. Many were sent here for crimes of passion, theft, or murder, but all shared the same fate in existence, defined by punishment, deprivation, and fear. Over the decades, riots, beatings, and unexplained deaths filled the prison's record books. By the time it closed, Rusk Unit had earned a reputation not only as a place of suffering, but as a house of torment where violence seemed to feed on itself. When the gates finally shut for good, one might have expected silence to follow. But almost immediately, strange tales began to emerge. Locals living near the deserted compound reported hearing metallic rattles drifting across the fields late at night. Some described it as the sound of heavy chains being dragged across the floor. Others swore it was the rhythmic clanging of cell doors being slammed in quick succession. No guards, no prisoners, no maintenance crews remained, yet the noises persisted. The sheriff's office once investigated after repeated complaints, but nothing was found. Every lock was still sealed, every door untouched, and yet the reports never stopped. Urban explorers and ghost hunters eventually made Rusk Unit a pilgrimage site. They brought cameras, recorders, and electromagnetic sensors, eager to capture the voices of the past. What they found went far beyond simple legend. Many reported hearing moans echoing from empty hallways, as if dozens of men were crying out in pain or pleading for release. Others felt sharp drops in temperature, sudden enough to see their breath fog in the humid night air. Photographs taken inside revealed strange phenomena, shadowy silhouettes peering from barred windows, misty shapes standing motionless in corners, or translucent figures lingering at the ends of hallways. The most chilling part was how often these apparitions seemed to watch, aware of the living intruders who dared to walk their domain. One famous photograph, taken by a ghost hunter named Elena Morales in the late 1990s, shows a black silhouette framed against the dim light of a cell. The figure appears to be a man in tattered prison garb, head bowed, with his hands clutching invisible bars. Experts analyze the image, searching for signs of manipulation, but the lighting and reflections matched perfectly with the environment. Morrell swore no one else was in the cell that night. To this day, the image is cited as one of the most convincing visual proofs of paranormal presence at Huntsville Unit. The stories only deepened from there. A local farmer, whose land borders the old property, reported seeing lights flickering inside the main building at midnight. He described them as faint blue glows, like lanterns swaying behind barred windows. Sometimes, he claimed, the lights moved in rhythm with footsteps. Another resident spoke of hearing singing low, mournful voices humming what sounded like hymns or old work songs. The melodies carried across the open fields, rising and falling like a lament for lost souls. By the time anyone ventured close enough to investigate, the sounds always vanished into silence. Inside the prison itself, the atmosphere is suffocating. Even in daylight, the air feels heavy, as though centuries of grief cling to every surface. The paint has peeled away, the steel rusted over, but the architecture remains unmistakably oppressive. Visitors describe a sense of dread as soon as they pass through the gates, an invisible pressure that tightens around the chest. Some claim to feel watched from every direction. Others speak of a presence following close behind, the faint shuffle of footsteps that stop when they turn around. In one of the isolation cells, ghost hunters recorded a faint but distinct knocking 3 times, slow and deliberate echoing through the dark. What's most unsettling is that the spirits of Huntsville Unit do not seem content to remain unseen. Multiple witnesses have described physical sensations: a tug on the sleeve, a tap on the shoulder, or a sudden rush of cold air passing directly through them. One investigator fainted after claiming to feel a hand grab his wrist, icy and firm, pulling him toward a cell door. When he awoke, the rest of his team found deep red marks on his arm, shaped like fingerprints. Locals believe these manifestations are the echoes of the inmates who died violently behind the walls. Records tell of suicides, murders, and fatal beatings. Many prisoners were buried in unmarked graves on the property, their names forgotten and their stories erased. Some say the anguish of these men has soaked into the soil, binding their spirits to the place where their suffering ended. Even the guards are not immune to speculations. Several are rumored to haunt the watchtowers, forever standing vigil over the lost souls they once controlled. On especially quiet nights, the wind carries strange sounds from the direction of Huntsville Unit. The faint rattle of iron, the slam of a heavy door, the echo of a voice calling out through the dark. Those brave enough to listen claim the cries form words, pleas for help, curses, confessions whispered to the night. These moments, fleeting and fragile, are said to be the voices of the damned. Prisoners whose regret and pain outlived their mortal forms. Today, Huntsville Unit remains abandoned, fenced off from the public. Weeds crawl through the cracks, and dust covers the floors where men once marched in chains. But for those who know its history, the silence of the old prison feels alive. Beneath that stillness lies something breathing, something remembering. The spirits of Huntsville Unit, it seems, have not moved on. They linger in the corners, pacing in their eternal cells, forever reliving the moments of rage, despair, and hopelessness that defined their existence. Each clang of a phantom chain, each echoing cry in the night, reminds the living that not all prisons release their captives. Some walls hold tighter than time itself, keeping their ghosts locked within. And as long as the ruins of Huntsville Unit stand, so too will the lament of the prisoners who never found freedom, their sorrow and anger reverberating through the empty halls, a chorus of the damned forever echoing in the dark. Hidden behind quiet trees and rusted fencing, the Huntsville Cemetery rests on a lonely stretch of land just beyond the walls of Texas's oldest prison. Here, beneath unmarked headstones and rows of plain concrete markers, lie the remains of thousands of inmatesmen who were executed, died in confinement, or were forgotten by the world beyond those walls. Known to locals as the prison cemetery, this place carries a silence so thick it seems to swallow sound itself. It is said that the souls buried here never found peace. their cries for mercy and freedom echoing through the night ere long after their bodies turn to dust. Those who dare to visit the site after dark speak of shadowy figures drifting among the graves, orbs of pale light floating between the stones, and whispers that rise from the ground like a wind that remembers. Each grave in Huntsville Cemetery tells a story without words. Most of the markers bear only a number, no name, no birth date, no identity beyond what the prison assigned. These men were stripped of everything, even in death. Some were executed in the nearby death chamber, their final moments punctuated by the hum of the electric current or the hiss of lethal injection. With no family to claim them, the state laid them here in the hard Texas soil, row after row, stretching across the field like a ledger of forgotten souls. By day, the cemetery appears calm, almost ordinary. The grass sways, birds perch on the stones, and sunlight filters through the leaves in golden patches. But when night falls, that serenity changes. Investigators who have visited after dark describe the air as unnaturally still, the temperature dropping the moment they cross through the iron gate. Flashlights flicker and equipment malfunctions without reason. It's as though the energy of the dead distorts everything around it. Many say they feel watched, hundreds of unseen eyes following every step. Paranormal investigators who frequent Huntsville Cemetery have captured countless unexplained phenomena. Shadow figures appear on thermal cameras, drifting between headstones or vanishing into thin air. Orbs of light, sometimes faint blue, sometimes glowing white, hover over specific graves, pulsing like faint heartbeats before fading into the night. The most common experience, though, is the sound, the soft murmur of voices that rise and fall, as if carried on an invisible breeze. Some describe them as prayers. Others hear sobbing or the low hum of men singing old hymns. A few have claimed to hear the words clearly, pleas for release, apologies whispered to the dark, or a single word repeated again and again, freedom. One of the earliest documented encounters came from a night watchman in the 1980s. He was patrolling the area near the prison perimeter when he saw faint lights flickering beyond the fence line, hovering over the cemetery. Thinking vandals had entered, he went to investigate. When he reached the gate, the lights vanished. In their place, he heard the clank of metal, like shackles dragging across stone. Then came the voice, hoarse, low, and filled with sorrow. It called his name. The watchman swore he froze in place, unable to move or speak. When the sound finally stopped, he fled and refused to work the night shift again. Other visitors have reported similar experiences. One ghost hunter described walking through the rows of graves when her camera picked up a faint human shape standing a few yards ahead. The figure appeared to be a man in old prison garb, gray uniform, head bowed. When she tried to approach, the shape dissolved into mist. Another investigator, while using an audio recorder, captured what sounded like multiple voices whispering over each other, too fast to comprehend but distinct enough to recognize as human. When played back, a single phrase stood out clearly amid the static: "Don't forget us." Some locals believe that the hauntings stem not from malevolence but from longing. The spirits here are thought to be caught in a loop of regret and despair, bound to the earth by the injustice or sorrow of their final moments. Many of them were poor, uneducated, or condemned without anyone to mourn them. For these forgotten men, death brought no closure, only silence. The cemetery became their only witness, holding the weight of their unspoken confessions. Even skeptics admit that Huntsville Cemetery carries an unusual atmosphere. The ground itself seems to hum with energy, a vibration just below the threshold of hearing. Some attribute this to the number of burials, thousands of men laid side by side in anonymity. Others believe it's the proximity to the prison, where executions still occur. The souls of the newly departed, they say, drift across the road to join the countless others already waiting beneath the soil. It's as if the veil between the living and the dead is thinner here, frayed by decades of suffering. On moonlit nights, witnesses claim the cemetery glows faintly, as though the light of the dead radiates from below. Strange mists form out of nowhere, swirling between the markers even when the air is dry. Visitors describe hearing faint footsteps behind them, only to find no one there. Some report the unmistakable sensation of fingers brushing against their arms, cold and fleeting, like a silent plea for recognition. Cameras often fail to capture clear images, their screens filled with static or distorted streaks of light. Yet every so often, a photograph reveals something uncanny, a face emerging from the shadows, a silhouette standing beside a grave, a pale hand reaching out from the darkness. Those who have spent time in the cemetery often leave with a sense of deep melancholy. It's not the kind of fear born of sudden fright, but a heavy sadness that lingers. The weight of so many untold stories presses down on the soul, reminding visitors of the fragility of life and the loneliness of death. The whispers that drift through the night seem less like threats and more like echoes of men yearning to be remembered, to have their existence acknowledged, even if only through the chill that passes down a living spine. Locals warn that the cemetery is not to be disturbed. Show respect, they say, and you'll be left alone. Those who mock or challenge the spirits reportedly leave feeling drained, haunted by recurring nightmares of faceless men standing at the foot of their beds. But those who come with quiet reverence often describe a strange peace and understanding that beneath the fear lies sorrow, and beneath the sorrow, a plea to never be forgotten. Deep in the piney woods of East Texas sits the Eastham Unit, one of the state's oldest and most notorious prison farms. For over a century, its sprawling fields stretched endlessly under the harsh southern sun, a place where men were sent not only to serve time, but to break under the weight of it. Once the pride of Texas' penal labor system, Eastham was a world of sweat, blood, and silence where prisoners toiled from dawn until nightfall, cutting cane, tending cotton, and enduring punishment that often bordered on cruelty. Though the machinery has long since stopped and the overseers are gone, many believe something still stirs in those fields. Ghost hunters, locals, and even former guards speak of shadows moving among the rows, the echo of shovels striking earth, and the murmurs of men who never truly left. The history of Eastham Unit is steeped in hardship. Established in the early 1900s, it was designed as a working prison, where inmates produced crops and maintained livestock for the state. The system was brutal, relying on chain gangs and manual labor that pushed prisoners to their limits. Many were forced to work long hours in the sweltering heat with little food or rest. Accidents were frequent. Punishments were severe. Those who collapsed from exhaustion were often beaten or left to wither where they fell. Over time, hundreds of men are believed to have died from heat, illness, or violence, their bodies buried quietly in unmarked graves on or near the property. The stories of haunting at Eastham Unit began shortly after these deaths. Guards walking the fields at night claimed to hear footsteps pacing behind them, though no one was there. Others saw figures in striped prison uniforms moving through the fields with slow, methodical motions, as if still laboring under invisible chains. These apparitions were often seen at the edges of vision, never quite solid but always unmistakably human. Some guards left their posts after swearing they saw entire lines of spectral workers moving through the fog, the faint clink of metal echoing from nowhere. Decades later, as parts of Eastham fell into disuse, paranormal investigators began to explore the grounds. The old work barns, storage sheds, and fields became hotspots for unexplained activity. Recordings captured faint voices and rhythmic sound, shovels hitting soil, the creak of wagon wheels, even the distant crack of a whip. One investigator described hearing the faint chant of a work song carried on the wind, the kind sung by prisoners decades earlier to keep time during long hours of labor. When she tried to locate the source, the sound stopped abruptly, replaced by total silence and a sudden chill that sank deep into her bones. The most commonly reported phenomenon at Eastham is the sight of shadow figures. They appear mostly near the fields or around the old workshops, their outlines blurred but distinctly human. Some carry what appear to be tuzos, picks, or sacks slung over their shoulders. Witnesses say these figures move with purpose, as though unaware that their toil no longer serves any master. At times, they vanish into the mist that gathers over the low ground near dawn, leaving behind only the echo of footsteps in the soil. Ghost hunters attempting to record these apparitions often report their cameras freezing, batteries draining, or strange static interference sweeping through their audio. Inside the remaining buildings, the atmosphere grows heavier. Investigators who entered the old storage sheds or guard shacks describe the air as thick and suffocating, filled with a sense of unseen presence. Cold spots appear suddenly, even during the height of Texas summer. One group claimed to feel vibrations through the floor, as if heavy machinery were operating somewhere nearby though. The equipment had been removed decades earlier. Others reported faint voices whispering in their ears, too soft to understand but unmistakably human. Some say the spirits that haunt Eastham are angry, bound to the land by resentment and pain. They endured years of suffering under the watch of cruel overseers, and death did not bring them the freedom they sought. Witnesses describe feeling waves of emotion, rage, grief, and exhaustion when walking through certain areas of the property. Psychics who have visited claim the energy is thick with sorrow, a lingering echo of desperation from those who labored and died here. They're still working, one medium reportedly said. They don't know they're gone. Not all the stories are rooted in fear. A few visitors describe moments of eerie calm, as if the spirits simply wish to be remembered. In the quiet hours just before dawn, when the air is still and the mist hangs low, some claim to hear soft singing the old prison songs once used to pass the time between sunrise and dusk. These songs drift faintly across the fields, their rhythm steady and mournful, carrying the voices of men who found a strange kind of unity in suffering. To those who hear it, the experience is deeply moving, a reminder of the human endurance that wants to find Eastham's long, dark history. Locals who live near the site speak with a mix of respect and fear. They warn travelers not to wander near the fields at night. You'll hear them before you see them, one resident said. The sound of chains, the scrape of shovels, and if you listen too long, you might feel them brush past you. Some have reported seeing flickering lantern lights moving across the property, though the area has been unoccupied for years. Others hear low murmurs or the distant clang of metal long after midnight. Even in daylight, Eastham carries an uncanny energy. Visitors describe feeling watched from the tree line or sensing motion in their peripheral vision. The soil itself seems to hum with memory, a weight that cannot be lifted. Some believe the restless energy comes from the sheer volume of suffering that once soaked into the land, a psychic scar left behind by generations of forced labor. Others think the spirits remain because their work was their life, and without it, they cannot rest. Whatever the reason, Eastham's haunted legacy endures, its fields forever echoing with the toil of the dead. Rusk State Hospital stands quietly in the pine forests of East Texas, its weathered brick walls and towering oaks giving little away to the casual observer. But behind its faded facade lies a history steeped in torment, tragedy, and fear. Established in the late 1800s as a combination prison and mental health facility, Rusk quickly gained a reputation for its grim conditions. What was meant to be a place of rehabilitation became instead a site of suffering where the forgotten, the disturbed, and the condemned were locked away together, often with little distinction between madness and criminality. Over the decades, countless stories emerged of abuse, neglect, and mysterious deaths. Today, long after parts of the hospital have been abandoned, the echoes of that dark past still linger in its halls. Visitors and investigators who enter the old sections of Rusk often describe an overwhelming feeling of unease, as if the air itself is charged with sorrow. The temperature drops without warning, even in the sweltering Texas summer. Some claim they feel a presence watching them from doorways or shadows that seem to move against the light. It's said that in certain hallways, whispers rise from nowhere, soft, frantic murmurs that fade when you try to listen closely. Many believe these are the voices of patients and inmates whose suffering imprinted itself upon the walls, forever trapped in a loop of confusion and despair. The hospital's dual identity made it especially harrowing. It was both a psychiatric institution and a high-security prison, housing violent offenders deemed insane as well as those with severe mental illness. Treatment in the early years was crude and often cruel. Patients were restrained for days, subjected to electroshock therapy, and given experimental drugs that left them incoherent or permanently damaged. Some were confined to solitary rooms for months, their cries echoing down the corridors until they simply stopped. Records from that era are incomplete, but rumors persist of unmarked graves on the hospital grounds. Burials for those who died under suspicious or unrecorded circumstances. The most haunted areas of Rusk are said to be the older wings' long-abandoned wards, where paint peels from the walls and rust coats the metal bars of forgotten rooms. Investigators report hearing dragging sounds along the floors, like someone shuffling with chains around their ankles. Others have captured faint knocks, footsteps, and moans on their recording devices when no one else was present. A few have even claimed to see full-bodied apparitions, figures in tattered patient gowns or outdated uniforms, wandering aimlessly through the hallways before vanishing into thin air. One story tells of a nurse who worked in the hospital during the 1930s. She was assigned to a ward for violent inmates and was last seen walking toward one of the isolation rooms late one night. The next morning, she was gone. Her body was never found, but her keys were discovered lying on the floor outside the locked room. Staff at the time dismissed it as an escape or accident, but many believed something more sinister had happened. To this day, people claim to see a woman in a nurse's uniform drifting through that same corridor. She is often described as carrying a lantern or old-style flashlight, her face pale and expressionless, disappearing the moment she's noticed. Another legend centers around a patient known only as Thomas, who was said to have died during a botched electroshock treatment in the 1950s. His screams reportedly echoed through the building for hours afterward. Some claim that his spirit still roams the treatment ward, accompanied by the faint buzz of electrical static. Paranormal teams who visit that section of the hospital often experience equipment interference cameras shutting off, recorders malfunctioning, and lights flickering without cause. Several have reported the unmistakable smell of burning wires or ozone, followed by the sense of someone standing just behind them. The morgue, located in the hospital's basement, is another focal point for supernatural encounters. Investigators entering the room describe an almost unbearable cold and the feeling of being surrounded by unseen figures. The old autopsy tables remain, their surfaces rusted and stained. When silence falls, it's said you can hear faint metallic clinks, as though instruments are still being prepared. Some visitors have reported seeing dark forms standing near the slabs, motionless and watching. Their shapes indistinct but filled with a presence that chills to the core. Even the grounds outside the hospital seem touched by its dark past. There are areas where vegetation refuses to grow, patches of dead earth where psychics claim the energy is too heavy for life to take root. Locals say that on foggy nights, lights flicker in the windows of abandoned wards, long after the power was shut off. Security guards patrolling the property have reported hearing distant cries or the sound of footsteps following them, only to find the paths empty. One guard, after quitting his job, told a reporter that the worst part wasn't what he saw, but what he felt. "It's like the building breathes," he said, "like it's alive with all the pain that's been poured into it." For paranormal investigators, Rusk State Hospital has become a place of fascination and fear. Many describe it as one of the most active locations in Texas, not because of violent manifestations, but because of the overwhelming emotion that saturates every corner. The energy here is heavy, almost mournful, as though the building itself remembers every cry, every shock, every whispered plea for help that went unanswered. Some believe the spirits remain trapped, replaying their final moments over and over, unable to move on from the trauma they endured. Others think they are drawn to the living seeking recognition, forgiveness, or simply to be heard after decades of silence. One of the eeriest reports comes from a group that stayed overnight in the old administrative wing. Around 3 a.m., they heard the faint sound of a typewriter clacking in one of the offices. When they followed the noise, they found the room empty, discovered, with a broken machine sitting silent on a desk. As they stood there, a sudden chill filled the air, and one member swore she felt someone brush past her, whispering in her ear. The recording they captured during that moment revealed a single phrase in a faint male voice, "Still here." To walk through Rusk State Hospital today is to walk through layers of time. The air carries the weight of thousands of stories of those who lived, suffered, and died within its walls. The long, empty corridors seem to absorb every sound, turning whispers into echoes that stretch endlessly into the dark. For many, the haunting of Rusk is not simply a tale of ghosts, but a reflection of the pain humanity has inflicted upon itself in the name of order and cure. The spirits that linger are reminders of forgotten lives, lost voices, and a past that refuses to stay buried. Clemens Unit sits quietly amid the flat, humid expanse of Brazoria County, Texas, a facility that once bustled with the sounds of boots on concrete, echoing voices, and the clatter of prison life. Established in the late 1800s, it was one of the state's oldest correctional institutions, built to house both hardened criminals and farm laborers. For decades, Clemens was a place of toil and tension, a sprawling prison farm where men endured brutal heat, back-breaking work, and the unrelenting grip of isolation. But even as time marched on and the world outside changed, the old walls of Clemens seemed to hold on to something, an energy, a presence that would not fade. Today, those who know its history whisper of something else moving through its halls, something unseen yet deeply felt. The prison's long record of violence, mysterious disappearances, and tragic deaths has birthed countless stories of haunting phenomena. Guards have resigned after unexplainable experiences, and even the most skeptical investigators admit that something lingers in the air of presence that watches, listens, and sometimes speaks. The earliest tales of hauntings at Clemens date back nearly a century. Inmates would talk of hearing voices late at night, whispers carried through the ventilation ducts when no one else was awake. Some claimed they heard their own names being called, followed by the distant rattle of chains. Others saw faces at their cell windows, faces that vanished the instant they turned on their lights. Many dismissed it as paranoia born from confinement, but over the years, guards began to experience similar things. They reported seeing figures walking the corridors after lockdown, silhouettes of men pacing near the fences, only to find no one there. Perhaps the most chilling reports involve what has come to be known as the phantom inmates. On still nights, guards stationed in the towers claimed to see prisoners walking the exercise yard long after it. Cleared shadows moving in groups, pacing in silence beneath the floodlights. When security is dispatched to investigate, the yard is always empty. Cameras pick up faint movement, flickers of light, or dark shapes darting across the lenses, but never enough to form a clear image. Some say these apparitions are the spirits of men who died while trying to escape, forever reliving their final moments of desperation. Clemens' dark reputation is rooted in its brutal past. For decades, inmates worked the prison's vast farmlands, harvesting cotton and sugarcane under the watchful eyes of armed guards. Temperatures would soar past 100 degrees, and punishments for disobedience were swift and severe. Many prisoners perished under those conditions: heat stroke, exhaustion, or violent encounters with guards and other inmates. Some were buried in unmarked graves along the edge of the property. Those fields, now quiet, are said to be among the most haunted places on the grounds. Visitors and maintenance workers have reported hearing the rhythmic sounds of picks and shovels striking soil, followed by the faint murmur of male voices singing old work songs. On some nights, the air carries a distinct smell of sweat and dust, as if the spirits of those forced laborers still linger in the earth they once tilled. Inside the main building, there are other strange happenings. In the older cell blocks, guards have described walking rounds only to find cell doors, slightly ajar doors, that were locked minutes earlier. When they check the logs, there's no record of anyone entering those areas. Lights flicker without reason. Radios cut out mid-transmission, replaced by static that sometimes carries faint, unintelligible voices. One night, a corrections officer reported seeing a man in an outdated uniform standing at the end of a corridor. Thinking it was another guard, he called out, but the figure turned, revealing hollow eyes and a mouth that opened in a silent scream before fading into the shadows. There's a particularly eerie section known among staff as the Row, an isolated wing where solitary cells once housed the most violent offenders. Few guards enjoy patrolling it, especially at night. The temperature drops dramatically, and a suffocating stillness fills the air. Footsteps echo from unseen sources, and whispers seem to move just ahead of whoever walks through. Paranormal investigators who have visited the row describe hearing metallic clinks, low murmurs, and a deep moaning that reverberates from within the walls. One group captured what sounded like a voice saying, "Still waiting," on an audio recorder. No one knows who or what the voice belonged to. One of the most enduring ghost stories at Clemens concerns an inmate named Harold Red Simmons, a convicted murderer who vanished from his cell in the 1940s under mysterious circumstances. His disappearance was never explained. Some believed he escaped, others thought he was killed and secretly buried. Decades later, his name began appearing in paranormal accounts from the prison. Guards reported seeing a red-haired man wandering the halls, sometimes near the old records room, sometimes in the fields at dusk. He always disappears when approached. One former officer claimed Red once appeared right beside him during a night patrol, whispering, "They never found me," before vanishing into thin air. There are also stories about the warden's office, specifically the one used in the early 1900s, when Clemens was under strict military-style rule. Visitors report feeling a crushing heaviness in that room, as if the air itself resists being breathed. Some have heard the faint ticking of a clock that no longer exists, or seen the outline of a man seated behind the old desk, head bowed as though burdened by guilt. Legend has it that one of the early wardens took his own life there after years of overseeing brutal punishment regimes. His presence, they say, still lingers, restless and remorseful. Outside, near the old mess hall, stands a small, crumbling chapel where inmates once gathered for Sunday services. The roof has partially collapsed, and the pews are warped with age, but the space is eerily silent. Those who enter describe feeling watched, as if unseen eyes follow them from the shadows. Some claim to have heard faint singing, the ghostly hum of old hymns that rise and fade like wind through broken glass. On rare occasions, visitors say they see figures kneeling in the pews, heads bowed in silent prayer, vanishing when approached. Despite official denials, Clemens Unit has long been a magnet for paranormal investigators. Many leave shaken, claiming that what they encountered there was not just residual energy, but conscious entity spirits, aware of their surroundings and resentful of the living. The sense of confinement, even for visitors, is overwhelming. Some describe it as if the building itself is breathing, drawing people in, holding them for a moment, then releasing them with a weight they cannot explain. Those who believe the stories say that Clemens will never truly be free of its past. The suffering, the punishment, the endless cycle of violence, it all left an imprint too deep to fade. The phantom inmates, as they're now called, are thought to be echoes of those who never found peace, still pacing the halls, still searching for escape that never came. Goree Unit, nestled on the edge of Huntsville, Texas, stands as one of the oldest and most imposing correctional facilities in the state. Built in 1883, its red brick walls have witnessed over a century of punishment, labor, violence, and despair. From the moment it opened, Goree became a place where time seemed to stand still, a world sealed off from mercy, filled with echoes of anger, fear, and pain. Those who've walked its halls, both prisoner and guard, often say that the place itself feels alive, as though the memories of all who suffered within its walls have fused with the structure as bones. By day, the prison looks like any other: high fences, razor wire glinting in the Texas sun, and a steady rhythm of voices and footsteps moving through the corridors. But when night falls and the noise dies down, Goree Unit becomes something else entirely. The silence is heavy, almost suffocating, and that's when the whispers begin, soft, indistinct murmurs that seem to rise from the floors and drift through the air. Paranormal investigators call it residual energy, a haunting left behind by decades of human misery. Those who felt it firsthand call it something much darker. Goree's reputation for unrest stretches far back into its history. In the early 20th century, conditions were brutal. Prisoners worked grueling hours in the fields, often under the punishing sun, with little rest or water. Fights were common, escape attempts ended in bloodshed, and punishment was swift. Solitary confinement was a dark, narrow cell, with no light, no sound, and no mercy. Many inmates went mad in those tiny chambers, clawing at the walls or screaming until their voices broke. Guards said they could still hear those screams long after the prisoners were gone, faint, disembodied cries that seeped through the bricks at night. The old punishment wing, long abandoned, is one of the most haunted parts of Wynn Unit. Paranormal teams who've regained access describe an atmosphere that shifts suddenly from oppressive stillness to a suffocating chill. Cold spots appear in random places, as though invisible figures are standing just inches away. Cameras pick up strange shadows that move against the direction of light, and audio recordings often capture unexplained knocks, whispers, or distant sobs. One investigator described seeing what looked like a man's outline pressed against the far wall, a silhouette, faint and flickering. When she turned on her flashlight, the figure vanished, leaving behind only a faint scent of smoke and something metallic, like blood. Stories among the guards have persisted for decades. Many speak of the third corridor, an older hallway now used only for storage. Late at night, footsteps echo there when the entire block is empty. Radios cut out unexpectedly, replaced by static that sometimes forms into faint, rhythmic tapping, like someone beating on the metal doors from inside. One guard reported walking his rounds only to see a figure at the end of the corridor, thin, dressed in what looked like an outdated inmate uniform. The figure turned a corner, but when the guard followed, he found the hallway empty and ice cold. In the laundry building, where hundreds of prisoners once worked long shifts under blistering heat, strange phenomena continue to occur. Machines that have been unplugged for years suddenly hum to life, spinning empty drums in the silence. Workers have seen shadows darting between the aisles of rusted equipment, and some claim to hear the distant sounds of humming an old prison work song, half forgotten but eerily familiar. The smell of soap and sweat lingers, even though the building has been out of operation for decades. But perhaps the most chilling location at Wynn Unit is the old infirmary. During the early and mid-1900s, medical care was primitive, and death was a frequent visitor. Diseases spread quickly, and prisoners who died often did so alone, behind locked doors. Today, visitors say the air in that building feels thick, heavy, and electric. Some report feeling as though unseen hands brush against their arms, while others describe sudden bursts of freezing air that dissipate as quickly as they come. One investigator claimed to hear the unmistakable sound of labored breathing just over her shoulder, followed by a whisper that said, "Don't leave me." Not all of Wynn's ghosts are anonymous. One story centers on a man known only as Holloway, a prisoner who worked in the metal shop during the 1950s. According to local legend, Holloway was killed in an accident involving one of the heavy presses, crushed instantly while performing maintenance. After his death, workers began reporting strange occurrences, tools vanishing and reappearing in strange places, doors slamming shut without wind, and a faint metallic clang that echoed even when the machines were off. Some say Holloway still roams the workshop, his spirit bound to the site of his death. Guards have even claimed to see a man in overalls standing by the machinery, only to vanish when approached. In the cell blocks, the energy shifts between quiet dread and sudden fear. Inmates over the years have complained of waking in the night to see shapes moving in the darkness, or feeling pressure on their chests, as though someone were sitting on them. One former prisoner described hearing whispers coming from the cell next to his pillow, pleading words asking for water, for light, for release. But the cell beside him had been empty for weeks. Another claimed to see a figure standing inside his cell mirror, staring back with hollow eyes before fading away. 4 guards, night shifts at Wynn Unit are a test of endurance. Many refuse to patrol certain areas alone, especially near the older sections of the prison. The sense of being watched is constant. Some describe hearing keys jangling behind them, or the faint clinking of chains dragging across the floor. A few have quit outright after what they experienced and seen voices calling their names. Radios whispering static patterns that sounded like words, or the sudden feeling of cold hands brushing against their backs. Even outside the prison walls, The land itself feels touched by the weight of its history. The grounds once held a small cemetery for inmates who died without family to claim them. Locals say that on quiet nights, you can see faint orbs of light hovering above the graves, blue, white, sometimes red. Paranormal researchers who've visited the site report strong electromagnetic readings and unexplained temperature drops. It's as if the restless souls of once forgotten inmates still wander, bound not just to the buildings, but to the very earth itself. Over time, the Unit's haunted reputation has drawn ghost hunters and curious visitors from all over. Most leave with stories they can't explain: shadowy figures caught on camera, sudden bursts of cold air, and the overwhelming sensation of sadness that seems to permeate every hallway. They describe it as if the building remembers everything, every scream, every prayer, every desperate act of violence or mercy. The old Ramsey farm, tucked deep in the humid expanse of Brazoria County, Texas, lies shrouded in silence and shadow. Once part of the state's sprawling prison system, it was never just a farm. It was a world built on pain, sweat, and endurance. For decades, inmates toiled under brutal conditions, the Texas sun bearing down as they worked endless hours harvesting cotton, cane, and corn. It was a place where the land drank sweat by day and tears by night. Time has dulled the noise of clanging tools and shouted orders, but those who visit after dark claim that the ghosts of the past are still there, laboring endlessly under the dim glow of the moon. The Ramsey farm was established in the late 19th century, when the prison system relied heavily on convict leasing and farm labor. Prisoners, many of them young men, were sent to the fields with little rest and less mercy. They were chained in groups, overseen by guards on horseback, and made to work from sunrise to sundown. Those who fell behind faced punishments, sometimes a whip, sometimes worse. Death was not uncommon. Some succumbed to exhaustion, others to disease, and a few simply vanished into the vast, unforgiving swampland surrounding the farm. Their bodies were often buried in unmarked graves near the edges of the fields, forgotten by the world, but never, it seems, by the earth itself. Even in daylight, there's something uneasy about the land. The air hangs thick, heavy with moisture and memory. The soil is dark and rich, but many locals say it was nourished by more than just crops. It carries the energy of those who suffered upon it. Longtime residents tell stories of seeing faint figures moving among the rows at dusk, silhouettes bent low as if working invisible tools. Others have heard the sound of chains rattling when no one is there, or the rhythmic clang of a hoe striking soil in perfect tempo. Though the fields have been empty for decades, the earliest tales of the Ramsey farm hauntings date back to the 1930s. Farmers living nearby spoke of hearing distant voices at night, carried on the Winlow chants, perhaps the remnants of work songs once sung by chained prisoners. A few even claimed to see torches flickering across the fields, like ghostly overseers watching over spectral workers. When they approached, the lights would vanish into thin air, leaving behind only the faint scent of sweat and smoke. One story often told among locals is that of Old Red, a nickname given to a prisoner who reportedly collapsed during a particularly brutal summer in 1927. It said he begged for water, but the guards refused, telling him to get back to work. He died before sundown, right there in the rows of sugarcane. Since then, visitors claim to see a red-tinted figure wandering the fields, his form shimmering like heat rising off the ground. Some say he carries a rusted hoe, moving as if still trapped in endless labor. Others hear his raspy voice, whispering for water, fading into the night air. The old farmhouse and barns that once housed guards and storage have their own share of hauntings. The farmhouse, now partially collapsed, is said to groan and creak as though still inhabited. Paranormal investigators have recorded strange noises inside, heavy footsteps pacing the wooden floors, doors creaking open, and faint murmurs that sound like conversations in another room. Cameras often malfunction within its walls, batteries draining in minutes, as if something unseen feeds on their energy. On one recording, a voice was captured saying, "Keep working," followed by the metallic rattle of chains. In the barns, Shadows seem to move, even when no light source is present. The faint odor of sweat and dust lingers, mingling with the smell of old hay. Visitors describe feeling a sudden drop in temperature, followed by the distinct sensation of being watched. One man who explored the barn at midnight claimed to feel a hand brush against his shoulder, cold and rough like calloused skin. When he turned, no one was there, only the sound of chains dragging across the floor. The fields themselves are the heart of Ramsey's lingering hauntings. Under the moonlight, the land takes on a ghostly glow, and the air feels alive with whispers. Ghost hunters who have visited the site speak of seeing translucent figures walking in rows, bending, lifting, and turning as though still harvesting crops. Some have captured unexplained mists hovering low to the ground, or distant lights moving against the wind. On windless nights, it's said the sound of boots striking the earth can be heard, measured, heavy, like men marching in rhythm. One particularly chilling legend tells of the chain gang of the dead. According to the story, a group of prisoners once attempted to escape the farm. They fled into the swamp at dusk, dragging their chains behind them, but the mud swallowed them whole. None were ever found. Locals say that when fog rolls in from the bayou, you can hear them moving chains clinking faintly, followed by muffled voices calling out to one another. The sound comes closer, then fades, leaving behind only silence. Some nights, truckers driving past the area report seeing figures along the roadside, men in ragged clothes, covered in dirt, their faces obscured by shadow. They vanish when headlights hit them. Others claim to see a horse and rider watching from a distance, the image flickering like an old film reel before dissolving into the mist. The stories are many, and though some dismiss them as superstition, those who've experienced it firsthand know better. There's also the legend of the bell at midnight. During the farm's heyday, a large bell was used to signal the beginning and end of the workday. It was removed long ago, but visitors say that on certain nights, it rings again. The sound is distant, mournful, echoing across the empty fields, as though summoning the dead to their eternal labor. After the ringing stops, the air grows still and the faint, rhythmic sound of picks and shovels begins again. Modern paranormal teams have attempted to document the phenomena. Many leave with strange recordings, whispers, saying "Work, don't stop, or I'm still here." Some describe seeing orbs of light moving across the fields, while others experience sudden nausea, dizziness, or overwhelming sadness. It's as though the energy of suffering remains trapped in the soil, replaying fragments of the past over and over, unseen yet undeniably present. Even the animals seem to sense it. Horses refuse to approach certain areas of the property, snorting and backing away with wide, fearful eyes. Dogs whimper and pull at their leashes, staring into the darkness as if watching something the human eye cannot see. Today, the Ramsey farm is mostly overgrown, its fields reclaimed by nature. But the ghosts have not left. Travelers who dare to visit after dark speak of a powerful, mournful energy that seems to rise from the ground itself. The sound of distant labor echoes faintly through the still night, the soft scrape of shovels, the clink of metal, the whispered breath of men who never stopped working. Stiles Unit, sitting quietly near the marshlands of Beaumont, Texas, carries an atmosphere unlike any other. The moment one steps onto its grounds, the air grows heavy, as if soaked with decades of sorrow and secrets. The sound of the nearby swamp, insects droning, frogs croaking, mixes with the faint hum of the wind that snakes through the old fences. But there's something else beneath it all. Something unnatural, a low, rhythmic murmur that seems to rise from the very soil. The prison, built in the early 20th century, was designed for containment, not compassion. Brutal summers baked the metal walls, winters seeped chill into the concrete floors, and every day was a repetition of hard labor and harder punishment. Many who entered Stiles never left, not because of execution or formal sentence, but because of the violence and despair that festered within. It was here, in the long corridors and isolation cells, that the line between sanity and madness blurred, and where, some say, that boundary remains thin even now. Guards have long whispered that the building itself breathes. Late at night, When the floodlights dim and the inmates are locked away, the echoes begin, distant voices whispering from the end of the hallway, though no one is there. They start faint, almost like wind brushing through vents, but soon grow clearer, fragmented words, unfinished sentences, indistinguishable laughter. Those who spent years working the night shift claim the whispers often call out names, sometimes of inmates who died decades ago, and sometimes of those still alive. One former corrections officer, who worked at Styles for over 20 years, swore he heard the voice of an old prisoner named Reddick. Reddick had died violently during an uprising in the 1950s, when inmates revolted against what they called death labor, the grueling work in the nearby fields. Late one evening, as the officer checked the eastern block, he heard his name called clearly from behind a locked cell door. When he shone his flashlight inside, the room was empty, dust floating in the beam like suspended ash. But the voice came again, this time closer, whispering his name with the sound of broken lungs. He resigned a week later, never setting foot near Styles again. Ghost hunters and paranormal investigators have flocked to the prison over the years, drawn by the stories. Some bring thermal cameras, voice recorders, and EMF meters, hoping to capture proof of the supernatural. What they find, however, often leaves them shaken. Recordings have caught disembodied laughter, slow, hollow, and chilling, echoing in otherwise silent halls. Cold spots appear suddenly, dropping from humid Texas warmth to icy chill in seconds. Shadowy figures, tall and indistinct, have been seen crossing the corridors, sometimes disappearing into walls. In one notorious recording, a team captured a low murmur that seemed to answer their questions. When one investigator asked, "Do you remember this place?" the recorder picked up a faint reply, a whisper saying, "Still here." Another voice, fainter still, followed, "Forgotten." The team left that night without finishing their sweep. The older sections of the unit are the most active. The solitary cells, narrow, windowless rooms, where inmates once spent days or weeks in total darkness, are said to carry the strongest energy. Visitors often describe a crushing sense of dread upon entering, as though invisible eyes are watching from every corner. Some have reported feeling something tug at their clothes or brush past them, leaving behind a scent of sweat and rust. On rare occasions, people claim to hear chains dragging across the concrete floors, though no chains are used there anymore. Locals in Beaumont tell stories of how, on still nights, you can stand by the outer fences of Styles and hear faint whispers carried by the wind. They say the voices are those of the forgotten inmates, men who died nameless, buried in unmarked graves nearby. A few even claim that lights appear in the fields behind the unit, like lanterns bobbing through the darkness, as if spectral guards still patrol their posts. The legend extends to the prison chapel too. During the 1970s, a chaplain reportedly collapsed mid-sermon after claiming to see a crowd of pale figures standing in the back rows, figures that no one else could see. His replacement later described feeling a pressure whenever he prayed alone, as though dozens of unseen faces were turned toward him in silence. Today, those who enter the chapel at night often feel that same heaviness, an unseen audience listening from the shadows. There are more personal accounts as well, stories of inmates waking in the night to see another prisoner sitting silently at the end of their bunk, only to vanish when confronted. One man, serving time in the 1980s, swore that the apparition of his deceased cellmate returned nightly for a week, whispering fragments of prayers and apologies. He begged to be transferred, insisting that Styles keeps the dead too close. Even maintenance crews, tasked with keeping the decaying facility from collapse, speak in hushed tones about what they've witnessed: tools disappearing, doors unlocking themselves, lights flickering in sealed areas, all common reports. But the most chilling are the murmurs that never stop. Workers say that even when they shut down every system, the faint sound of conversation continues, dozens of voices blending into one indistinct hum, like a crowd forever talking just beyond the walls. No official acknowledgement has ever been made about the hauntings, of course. The state treats Styles like any other correctional facility, a place of rules, walls, and statistics. Yet those who've spent long enough there will tell you otherwise. The building itself remembers. Every shout, every tear, every dying breath, it's all imprinted on the foundation. Ferguson Unit, sitting quietly in the Texas countryside near Midway, is a place where silence feels unnatural. The fields surrounding it stretch endlessly, but inside the concrete walls, the air grows heavy and cold, not from the weather, but from something far older. This prison has long been marked by unrest, bloodshed, and unexplained occurrences that have left even the most hardened guards unwilling to linger after dark. Built in the mid-20th century, Ferguson was intended as a reform institution, but over time it became known for the violence that simmered within its walls. Fights between inmates were common, sometimes erupting without warning and ending in tragedy. Overcrowding, tension, and desperation turned the prison into a cauldron of anger. And when a place absorbs that much pain, people say it begins to hold on to it until the echoes of that suffering start to take form. Even now, decades after its darkest years, Ferguson Unit carries an atmosphere that unsettles almost everyone who steps inside. Former staff members talk about the sensation of being watched, even in empty corridors. The air feels colder near certain cells, the kind of chill that creeps beneath the skin and refuses to leave. Doors that were shut tight will sometimes swing open with a groan, and others slam violently without a single breath of wind. Some say these disturbances come from the trapped souls of inmates who died violently, either at the hands of others or through their own despair. The official records list many such deaths, but it's the unrecorded ones, the whispers of men who simply disappeared or were lost, that haunt the place most deeply. Rumors among the guards speak of one particular corridor where the temperature drops so low it feels like stepping into a freezer. Cameras malfunction there, lights flicker uncontrollably, and anyone who dares to walk alone claims to hear faint shuffling footsteps behind them. One officer once described a chilling encounter while doing his rounds late one night. He passed a row of solitary confinement cells that had been empty for years. As he moved through, the metallic clang of a cell door echoed down the hall, sharp, deliberate, unmistakable. But when he turned, every door was locked in place. Moments later, he heard low whispers from inside the last cell. The voice was indistinct at first, a breath against the dark, until it grew into words. Still here. The officer refused to patrol that section again. The oppressive atmosphere seems to reach its peak near the old infirmary. This part of the prison once held men too injured or sick to work, but it also saw its share of death. Nurses and medics long ago reported seeing shapes moving in the corners of their vision, dark, shifting shadows that didn't match any person present. When the infirmary was finally abandoned, strange sounds continued. Visitors who've been inside describe the echo of gurney wheels rolling across the floor. Though there are no gurneys left, others claim to hear labored breathing, like someone struggling to draw air. Coming from behind the closed doors of storage rooms, the chapel, meant to offer hope and repentance, became another focal point for strange activity. During evening prayers, inmates occasionally felt cold drafts sweep across the pews, despite sealed windows. Once, during a quiet service, a prisoner swore he saw a man kneeling at the altar, a man whose face was pale and wet, as though freshly washed in rain. The apparition vanished as soon as the lights flickered. Years later, when workers were renovating the area, they discovered that directly beneath the chapel lay the remnants of an old foundation, possibly the site of the prison's earliest executions. In the isolation wing, where the most dangerous or unstable inmates were kept, the phenomena grow even stronger. Guards have reported hearing banging from within empty cells and the echo of men screaming in agony, though no one is confined there anymore. One former inmate wrote, after his release, that the nights were never quiet. You could hear them, he said, talking from cell to cell, even when everyone was asleep. Not the living ones, the dead ones. They never stopped whispering. Investigators who have tried to study the prison's hauntings often leave with more questions than answers. Their recordings capture distant footsteps and the sound of cell doors creaking open, sometimes followed by bursts of static that resemble moans. In the old administrative wing, one group recorded what sounded like a heavy sigh echoing down the hall. a slow exhale of something that didn't belong. When they reviewed the footage later, a shadow appeared in a doorway, tall, unmoving, then gone in the blink of an eye. Local residents, too, speak of the prison with unease. On certain nights, when the wind comes from the east, strange noises drift over the fields, metallic clanging, faint shouts, and sometimes a long, drawn-out cry that fades slowly into the distance. Farmers living nearby claim that even their livestock react strangely, growing restless and refusing to graze near the outer fence after sundown. There's one tale that stands out among the many whispered legends, that of Cell Block C decades ago. During an especially brutal winter, a young inmate took his own life there after weeks of torment. Ever since, guards have reported seeing a figure pacing that same cell, visible only in flashes of light or reflected in glass. Sometimes, the door of cell C-17, the very one where he died, slams shut without warning. Maintenance crews have tried securing it multiple times, but no lock seems to hold. The energy in Ferguson Unit is unlike that of any other Texas prison. It's not loud or dramatic. It's quiet, almost patient, the kind of haunting that hides in silence, waiting for you to notice. Even in daylight, the walls seem to hum with unseen presence. The paint peels from the ceilings, revealing layers of the past like skin, shedding its memories. Every creak, every breath of wind through the vents feels deliberate, as though someone, somewhere within those walls, is still trying to be heard. Caulfield Unit stands in the heart of East Texas, surrounded by thick woods and open fields that stretch toward the horizon. At first glance, it looks like any other high-security prison: tall fences, watchtowers, and concrete walls that hold stories of control and confinement. But beneath the surface of this massive complex lies something much darker, something that defies time. The locals call them the chained spirits, and those who work the night shift swear that the prison itself seems to breathe, inhaling pain, exhaling whispers from another realm. Opened in the late 1960s, Caulfield Unit quickly became one of the largest prisons in Texas. From the beginning, its reputation was tied to discipline and hard labor. Inmates toiled in the fields, breaking soil under the unforgiving sun. It was a place built on sweat, punishment, and silence. But that silence didn't last. Within years, mysterious incidents began to mark the prison's history. Fights that escalated too quickly, sudden deaths in solitary confinement, and suicides that guards could never fully explain. Each tragedy added another weight to the atmosphere, another shadow cast over the halls. Old-timers among the guards say the strangeness began after one particular night in the early 1970s. A violent storm had rolled in, lightning striking dangerously close to the facility. That night, 3 inmates were found dead in their cells. No wounds, no signs of struggle, but expressions frozen in terror. The official report cited unknown causes, but those who saw the bodies said their hands were clenched tightly, as if grasping invisible chains. From that day forward, the sound of dragging metal became a recurring nightmare within Caulfield's walls. Guards patrolling the lower corridors late at night would hear the faint clank of iron, rhythmic and deliberate, as though someone were pulling heavy shackles across the floor. The first few times it happened, they believed it to be a prisoner loose from his cell. But every search ended the same way: empty halls, locked doors, and cold air that seemed to seep through the concrete. Some reported seeing dark silhouettes just beyond the range of their flashlights, standing motionless before fading into the shadows. Inmates began to talk, passing stories from cell to cell. They said the sounds came from men who had died working the fields decades earlier, convicts buried in unmarked graves near the property line. According to legend, their chains were never removed, and now their spirits wandered the halls, forever bound to the labor that killed them. Others whispered about the Black Hall, a stretch of corridor near the solitary block where lights flickered without reason. No matter how many times the bulbs were replaced, the same cold darkness would creep in. One prisoner, who served a long sentence at Caulfield, later described his nights there in a letter. "It wasn't quiet," he wrote. "You'd think a cell block at 2 in the morning would be silent, but it never was. You could hear things moving, chains dragging, slow and steady. Sometimes it would stop right outside your door, and you'd hear breathing. But when you looked, there was nothing. Just the dark, watching you. Even some of the officers, who prided themselves on skepticism, admitted strange experiences. A former warden once recounted how, during a power outage, he saw what he believed to be a guard walking down the corridor carrying a lantern. When he called out, the figure turned, but its face was pale and indistinct, almost melting into the shadows. The light went out, and when power returned, there was no one there. The infirmary at Caulfield carries its own heavy energy. Nurses have reported hearing whispers near the old examination rooms, soft voices repeating the same phrase over and over, too faint to make out. Equipment left neatly in place at the end of the shift would be found scattered by morning. Some claim to have seen figures standing at the edge of their vision, hands raised as though pleading for release. But perhaps the most chilling stories come from the solitary confinement wings. The cells here are small, cold, and perpetually dim, with walls that seem to absorb every sound. Guards walking through at night have described the sensation of being followed, and several have heard the distinct sound of chains rattling behind them, even when no one else was present. One night, a security camera captured a dark figure standing in the center of an empty cell, tall, unmoving. When officers went to investigate, the room was completely empty, yet the metal door bore deep scratch marks that hadn't been there before. Ghost hunters, who managed to gain access to the old parts of the prison, described the atmosphere as suffocating. Temperature drops of 20 degrees occur without warning, and the sound of metal clanking follows them from room to room. In one chilling recording, a faint voice can be heard repeating a single word: work. The investigators reported feeling their clothes tugged and hearing low moans echoing down the hallway. When they reviewed their footage, they saw faint outlines of men walking in line, as if chained together, vanishing just before reaching the camera's lens. Locals who live near Caulfield claim that even the land itself feels haunted. On windless nights, they say the air carries the faint echo of chains clinking together, not loud, but steady, as though the earth remembers what the walls conceal. Some have seen lights moving across the fields long after dark, soft and glowing like lanterns carried by unseen hands. Dogs refuse to go near the outer fence, and the grass near certain parts of the property grows thin and dry, even when rain falls for days. The legend of the chained spirits has only grown stronger over time. Former inmates who returned to visit family in the area refused to drive past the prison. What truly lingers in Huntsville Unit may never be known. The human mind can invent ghosts when faced with too much guilt or fear, but the stories here run too deep to dismiss entirely. Too many voices, too many consistent accounts, too many chills that arrive without reason. The prison remains active, and those who work there try to ignore the whispers, the footsteps, and the cold air that creeps along the halls. Yet sometimes, when the night is still, the sound returns, metal on stone, echoing slowly through the darkness. Deep in the rural expanse of Brazoria County, Texas, stands the remains of Stringfellow Unit, a forgotten prison swallowed by silence and shadow. The air around it feels heavier than the open sky should allow, carrying the weight of unspoken stories. Once home to hundreds of inmates, the now abandoned facility has become a place where time itself seems reluctant to move. Locals call it the silent prison, not because it's peaceful, but because the silence here feels alive. It's the kind that listens, breathes, and occasionally whispers back. Built in the early 20th century, Stringfellow Unit began as part of a sprawling prison farm. The land stretched wide and flat, an unforgiving sea of mud and heat. Prisoners were forced to work the fields from dawn to dusk, their backs bent under the Texas sun. Guards ruled with iron authority, and escape was rare, not because the fences were unbreakable, but because few who tried made it out alive. Some say the soil itself holds their bones, buried without names, marked only by the restless wind. Over the decades, Stringfellow's reputation darkened. Reports of violence, abuse, and unexplained deaths trickled out. Officially, it was just another hard Texas prison. Unofficially, it was a place where screams sometimes carried farther than they should, and where echoes didn't always belong to the living. When the prison was eventually shut down, no one fought to preserve it. Staff transferred elsewhere, the gates were locked, and the compound was left to rot under the weight of its memories. But the building didn't die quietly. Visitors who venture there today, urban explorers, thrill seekers, or the rare paranormal investigator, all tell eerily similar stories. They describe the silence as suffocating, so thick it presses against the ears. Even the wind seems hesitant to move through the decaying corridors. Yet, within that stillness, something stirs. Whispers drift through the halls, faint, broken voices that rise and fade like breaths from another world. No words, just fragments, a single name, a low sob, a sound like someone exhaling behind you. Doors that were once sealed shut will creak open as if pushed by unseen hands. Others slam with violent force, shaking the dust from the walls. One explorer recorded the sound of heavy boots pacing behind him, slow, deliberate steps echoing down the empty hallway. But when he turned around, no one was there. His footage later revealed a faint, translucent figure standing just beyond the reach of his flashlight, its face blurred, its posture unmistakably human. The prison chapel, once a place of reflection and reluctant hope, has become one of the most haunted spots on the property. Faded hymnals still litter the pews, their pages yellow and curling. Visitors report hearing faint music, like a distant choir humming from somewhere unseen. Some describe the scent of candle wax or smoke, though the chapel hasn't been lit in years. A few have caught faint figures kneeling near the altar, heads bowed in eternal prayer, before vanishing as the camera lens refocuses. The cell blocks themselves are colder than the outside air, even in midsummer. Many explorers claim to feel temperature drops so sudden that frost seems to form on the edges of their breath. The cells closest to the isolation wing are the worst. The air there is different, dense, and unmoving. Some say you can hear chains rattling in the darkness, or muffled cries from deep within the walls. One former correctional officer who revisited the site said he recognized the pattern of the sounds, the exact rhythm of a prisoner dragging shackles during solitary confinement decades ago. The infirmary, however, holds the most chilling reputation. This is where injured inmates were treated, and where many took their final breath. Old medical tables still stand, their metal frames corroded and cold to the touch. Paranormal teams have captured orbs of light darting across the room, and several have recorded disembodied voices. One audio clip revealed a faint but distinct whisper, "Help me." Another investigator, while reviewing footage, noticed something impossible, her own shadow stretching across the room, despite her standing completely still. It's not only investigators who've experienced the strange happenings. Nearby residents speak of seeing lights flickering inside the prison long after midnight, not from flashlights, but from within the building itself, as if someone were pacing with a lantern. On windless nights, they hear the clang of metal doors and distant shouting carried through the fields. Some drivers passing along the nearby road report glimpsing a figure standing at the main gate, a man in an old prison uniform, head bowed, hands clasped behind his back. When headlights hit him, he disappears. One legend surrounding Stringfellow tells of a guard named Hollis, known for his cruelty. According to inmates, Hollis would lock men in isolation for days without food or water, claiming it was God's punishment. In the early 1980s, he vanished during a shift change. His keys and flashlight were found near cell block D, but his body was never recovered. Today, those who walk through that corridor at night claim to hear his voice barking orders, yelling threats, the sound growing louder before suddenly stopping. Some say it's his spirit, trapped within the same halls where he once inflicted suffering. Others believe the inmates he wronged made sure he never left. The prison's energy feels ancient, a mix of despair, rage, and regret that refuses to fade. The walls are etched with names, scratched by desperate hands. When moonlight filters through the broken windows, those carvings seem to shimmer faintly, as though the names are still trying to be read. One explorer captured a chilling photograph in the mess hall, a table covered in dust, with the faint outline of a hand pressed into its surface. No one had touched it, yet the print appeared fresh, as though someone had just been sitting there. Some believe Stringfellow's hauntings stem from unfinished business, prisoners who died unjustly, or guards who met violent ends. Others think the land itself is cursed. Before the prison, the area was home to a plantation where enslaved laborers worked under brutal conditions. Their unmarked graves were reportedly uncovered during early construction. But instead of relocating the remains, builders simply paved over them. Many locals insist that this is where the darkness began, that the restless energy of the past merged with the suffering of the prison, creating something that can never truly rest. Today, Stringfellow Unit stands as a hollow monument to Texas's darkest chapters. The air hums with what feels like memory, the cries of the lost, the prayers of the damned. Nature is slowly reclaiming it, vines crawling up the walls and grass sprouting through cracks in the pavement. But the spirits remain. Visitors say that, as you leave, the whispers follow, soft, unintelligible, yet unmistakably human. Hidden behind the tall fences and watchtowers of the Wynn Unit in Huntsville, Texas, lies a quiet field few outsiders ever visit. To the untrained eye, it appears to be just another piece of overgrown land, dotted with simple markers that blend into the earth. But those who know its history call it Wynn Cemetery, a burial ground for the forgotten inmates of Texas's prison system. Here lie hundreds of men who lived, suffered, and died behind bars, many of them without family to claim their remains. Their only memorials are weathered stones marked with numbers instead of names. It is a place of silence, but it is not still. The air seems to hum with something unseen, something restless. Locals and prison staff alike speak of Wynn Cemetery in hushed tones. During the day, it feels solemn, almost peaceful. But when the sun dips behind the pine trees, the energy changes. A chill settles across the field, and the shadows grow long and sharp. The wind that moves through the grass sounds like whispers, not random gusts, but voices, faint and pleading. Paranormal investigators who have visited the site describe it as one of the most active haunted locations connected to the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. Some believe the spirits buried here are trapped, their souls tied to the injustices and misery they endured in life. The cemetery dates back over a century, when Wynn Unit first opened as part of Huntsville's vast prison network. Inmates who died of illness, violence, or execution were often laid to rest here when no one came to claim them. Records show burials from as early as the 1920s, tuberculosis victims, men lost to heat stroke during field labor, others executed in the nearby Walls, Eunice death chamber. Their bodies were transported under cover of darkness, accompanied by guards and prison chaplains, then lowered into the ground with little ceremony. Some were buried with their chains still attached to their ankles. Over time, grass grew over the graves, but the memories of those buried there never faded entirely. Nighttime visitors to Wynn Cemetery report seeing shadowy figures drifting among the graves, tall silhouettes that seem to watch silently before fading into the darkness. Others describe sudden drops in temperature, so sharp they can see their breath even on warm summer nights. Flashlights flicker uncontrollably, batteries drain in seconds, and cameras malfunction for no apparent reason. In some recordings, faint voices can be heard, low murmurs, sometimes crying, sometimes calling out indistinguishable words. One investigator captured a clear whisper that seemed to say, "Release us." Former guards and staff members have their own unsettling experiences to share. One officer recalled driving past the cemetery after a late shift and noticing movement near the far edge of the field. Thinking it might be animals, he stopped and shined his spotlight across the graves. For a moment, he saw what looked like three men standing side by side, wearing faded gray uniforms. When he stepped out of his truck for a closer look, the figures were gone, leaving only the rustling of the wind. He swore he heard chains clinking faintly as he drove away. Another story tells of a groundskeeper who maintained the property in the 1990s. He would mow the grass and clean the markers weekly. But every morning he returned to find certain areas, disturbed soil shifted, flowers uprooted, and small holes appearing near the older graves. Once, he found a marker that had been pulled from the earth and laid flat beside the grave, though no one else had keys to the gate. When asked if he believed in ghosts, he simply replied, "You don't have to believe. You just have to listen. They're still here. Some believe the haunting of Wynn Cemetery stems from the lack of dignity given to the inmates in death. Many were buried without ceremony, forgotten by both the system and society. Others suggest the energy comes from the sheer concentration of suffering connected to the prison system itself. Wynn Unit, like many Texas prisons, was notorious for grueling labor, violence, and despair. Over the decades, countless men lost their lives to illness, fights, suicide, and execution. Their final resting place became a silent record of the pain that the walls could no longer contain. Investigators who visit the cemetery often leave offerings, coins, cigarettes, or small crosses as gestures of respect. Some say doing so keeps the spirits calm. One paranormal team described an eerie moment when their temperature sensors detected a sudden 10-degree drop while a voice recorder captured faint crying sounds. A female investigator placed a cross on one of the graves and whispered, "You're not forgotten." Seconds later, the crying stopped, replaced by a soft breeze that passed gently through the grass, as if the earth itself sighed. Locals also tell of lights appearing over the graves, bluish orbs that hover and move slowly before vanishing. Some witnesses claim these lights appear most often on the anniversary of major prison executions. Others have seen mist forming into vague human shapes that linger near the fence line. A few even report the sensation of invisible hands brushing against their arms or the sound of heavy footsteps pacing behind them when no one else is near. Perhaps the most unsettling legend involves a row of silence, a stretch of graves believed to contain executed inmates from the nearby Walls Unit. Paranormal groups claim that EVP, electronic voice phenomena, recordings made in that area capture words like forgive, justice, and no light. The implication is chilling that these spirits may still be awaiting redemption or release from the burden of their deaths. Despite its haunted reputation, Wynn Cemetery remains a site of quiet reverence for many. Former inmates who turned their lives around sometimes return to pay respects to those who never left. They bring flowers or small tokens, standing in silence among the numbered stones. Some say that when they close their eyes, they can almost feel a presence, a sense of being watched, not with anger, but with longing. One visitor described her experience in a blog post. "It didn't feel evil. It felt sad. The air was thick with memory. I kept hearing whispers, like 100 men talking low. When I asked out loud if they wanted to be remembered, everything went still. Not a sound, not even the crickets, just silence so deep, it felt like someone was listening." Even in daylight, the cemetery's mood lingers. The markers, some cracked and faded, lean against the passage of time, each one representing a life cut short and a story untold. The earth itself feels heavy, as if holding secrets it refuses to give up. Visitors who walk the grounds speak of an unshakable feeling that they are not alone, that somewhere just beyond the edge of sight, the spirits of Wynn's forgotten inmates still move among the graves, searching for peace they never found in life. On the outskirts of the old Rusk State Hospital grounds in East Texas lies a small, weathered cemetery, hidden among pines and tangled weeds. It is known to locals as Rusk Cemetery, a burial place for those who died in confinement, their lives forgotten by time. The graves, simple and unadorned, bear little more than numbers or faded names etched into crumbling stone. For decades, it has stood as a quiet monument to despair, tragedy, and the uneasy silence of the dead. But that silence, many say, is deceptive. Visitors who come to Rusk Cemetery after dark tell stories of movement among the graves, figures seen out of the corner of the eye, fleeting and insubstantial. Some appear to sit on their own headstones, their forms translucent, their posture weary. Others drift slowly between the trees, never straying far from the earth that binds them. Locals who live nearby claim they can hear faint moans on windless nights, as though the souls buried there are still crying out from beneath the soil. The whispers come from all directions, soft, sorrowful, and impossible to ignore. The cemetery's history is steeped in suffering. Established in the late 1800s, it served as the final resting place for patients and inmates who perished within the walls of the Rusk State Hospital, a facility that functioned as both a mental institution and a prison. During its early years, Rusk was notorious for overcrowding, neglect, and abuse. Patients were often subjected to harsh experimental treatments or left to waste away in isolation. Many who died there had no family to claim them. Their bodies were carried to the cemetery on wooden carts and lowered into the ground without ceremony. Over time, hundreds were buried in those narrow plots, men and women whose names were forgotten, whose causes of death went unrecorded. The earth became heavy with unmarked stories, and the weight of their anguish seemed to cling to the place itself. Those who visit say the air around Rusk Cemetery feels thick, as if charged with unseen energy. Even in daylight, there's a stillness that presses against the chest, an unspoken warning to tread lightly. The first reports of ghostly activity came from groundskeepers and hospital staff in the 1940s. Some described seeing pale figures standing among the gravestones at dawn, vanishing as soon as they were approached. Others heard soft footsteps following them as they worked, though the cemetery was empty. One caretaker claimed he saw a woman in a tattered hospital gown seated on a headstone, her hair tangled and her face turned toward the sunrise. When he called out to her, she looked at him for a moment, then dissolved into the air. He never returned to work alone again. As the decades passed, the stories multiplied. Paranormal investigators began to take interest in Rusk Cemetery, drawn by its tragic past. They brought cameras, recorders, and EMF devices, hoping to capture proof of the haunting. Many left with chilling evidence. Recordings revealed faint whispers answering their questions, voices that seemed to come from the ground itself. Photos taken in the dark revealed misty shapes hovering near graves or strange lights floating above the markers. One team reported capturing the faint sound of chains dragging through the grass, though no metal was present anywhere nearby. Locals who venture near the cemetery after sunset describe an overwhelming sense of dread. Some feel watched from the moment they step through the gate. Others claim to hear soft crying or the sound of a slow, rhythmic humming, as if someone were singing to themselves in the dark. One visitor reported feeling a hand brush against his arm, though no one was there. Another said her flashlight flickered out the instant she reached the oldest section of graves. When she turned it back on, she found her path blocked by a faint, shadowy figure that slowly turned and disappeared into the woods. There are rumors that certain graves in Rusk Cemetery are particularly active. The oldest section, where the earliest patients were buried, is said to be the most haunted. Visitors standing near those graves often experience sudden temperature drops or the feeling of cold breath against their necks. In the newer section, some report seeing small orbs of light hovering near the ground, moving slowly as if guided by unseen hands. A few claim these lights follow them as they walk, only to vanish when they try to take a photo. The spirits said to linger here are not malicious, but neither are they at peace. They seem caught between worlds, trapped by the pain and confusion that define their final days. Some ghost hunters believe these souls remain because they were denied the dignity of remembrance. Buried without names, without prayers, they linger in the space between memory and oblivion. Their whispers are calls to be acknowledged, to be seen once more. One chilling account comes from a man who visited the cemetery on a foggy autumn night. He described hearing faint voices murmuring his name from somewhere deep within the trees. Thinking it was a trick of the wind, he ignored it until the whispers grew louder and more distinct. He turned on his flashlight and saw several pale shapes standing between the headstones, their faces obscured. He ran back to his car, but as he started the engine, he caught one last glimpse in his rearview mirror, a figure seated calmly on a grave, watching him leave. Even in daylight, Rusk Cemetery carries an eerie stillness. The markers are cracked and sunken, the ground uneven where time has worn away the soil. Some graves have been lost entirely to nature, their outlines swallowed by grass and roots. Yet those who come here often speak of feeling a presence, not threatening, but mournful, as though the dead are aware of being remembered at last. From time to time, visitors leave small offerings, coins, flowers, even handwritten notes. Some say that doing so brings a strange calm to the atmosphere, as if the spirits are momentarily soothed, but the peace never lasts. By nightfall, the voices return, low, persistent, echoing through the air like a chant of sorrow. Eastham Cemetery sits quietly in the shadow of the old Eastham Unit, a place that once symbolized the hardest edge of Texas prison life. Tucked deep in the flat, wind-swept fields of Lovelady, the cemetery is ringed by rusted barbed wire and overgrown grass. The stones, if they can be called that, are plain slabs of cement, many marked only with numbers or faded initials. But according to locals, this modest patch of ground holds more than forgotten bones. They say the restless spirits of the men who worked, suffered, and died in Eastham's brutal labor fields still wander here. Ghosts of endless toil, bound forever to the earth they once tilled. The story of Eastham Cemetery begins with the prison farm itself, established in the early 1900s. The Eastham Unit was notorious even among Texas prisons, infamous for its harsh working conditions and violent reputation. Inmates were forced to labor from sunrise to sunset in the relentless heat, harvesting cotton, clearing fields, or building fences under the eyes of armed guards on horseback. For many, the work never ended. Those who collapsed from exhaustion were often left where they fell, their bodies later buried just beyond the fields they once worked. There were no funerals, no headstones, and no names carved into marble. Only dirt, sweat, and silence. Over time, this unmarked burial ground grew into what is now Eastham Cemetery. The inmates who died of overwork, disease, or punishment were laid to rest side by side, their graves shallow and hastily dug. The living moved on, but something about the place never settled. Guards began reporting strange occurrences during their nightly rounds near the cemetery fence. They would hear the rhythmic sound of shovels striking earth, though no one was there. Others swore they saw figures moving in the darkness. Men stooped as if under the weight of invisible burdens, their forms dissolving into the mist as soon as they were approached. By the 1950s, tales of haunting had become part of Eastham's whispered lore. One former prison cook, who worked at the unit for nearly a decade, recalled hearing chains dragging across the gravel outside the kitchen window long after it sounded like the work gang had come back, he said. But there wasn't a soul outside. Other staff described cold winds, sweeping through the fields even on still summer nights, bringing with them faint voices, calling out numbers, the roll calls of men long dead. Paranormal investigators who have visited the site speak of the same eerie sensations. Cameras malfunction, batteries drain inexplicably, and audio devices capture faint but distinct sounds, the rhythmic grunts of labor, the clank of metal tools, and muffled prayers carried on the wind. On one investigation, a team captured a thermal image that showed several warm, human-like shapes moving near the graves, but when flashlights were turned toward them, nothing was there. The team described feeling an oppressive heaviness, as if the air itself had thickened. One of the most chilling encounters was reported by a night guard in the 1970s. He was patrolling the outer perimeter when he saw what he thought was an inmate standing near the cemetery gate. The figure appeared to be digging with a shovel, its movements slow and steady. The guard called out, ordering the man to stop. The figure did not respond. As he raised his flashlight, the beam caught nothing but the outline of a hole in the ground. The digger had vanished. The next morning, a fresh depression was found near the spot, though no one had been assigned to dig there. Locals who live near the Eastham property also have their stories. On quiet nights, they claim to see dim lights flickering across the fields, like lanterns being carried by unseen hands. Others report hearing the distant hum of men singing work songs, old prison field chants that haven't been heard for generations. A retired rancher once said he found fresh footprints in the dirt by the cemetery fence. Though the ground had been untouched since the last rain, it was like they'd just come out for another day's work, he said softly. The air hangs heavy with moisture from the nearby river, and the silence feels deeper than normal, as though sound itself avoids the place. Some have reported feeling lightheaded upon entering, while others claim they can hear faint breathing behind them. One paranormal enthusiast, who spent the night recording near the graves, said he woke to the sensation of something tugging gently at his pant leg, as if trying to get his attention. When he turned on his flashlight, The ground beside him was freshly disturbed, as though a hand had reached out from below. It's said that the spirits seen in Eastham Cemetery are not angry, but weary, still bound by the routines that define their lives. Ghost hunters frequently report seeing dark shapes moving rhythmically, bending as if lifting invisible sacks or dragging tools across the dirt. Some witnesses say they can even hear the faint creak of wagon wheels or the bark of an unseen overseer shouting commands. It's as though time itself forgot to release them, trapping these lost laborers in an endless cycle of toil. Not all experiences are frightening. A few visitors claim to have felt an unexpected sense of calm, as though the ghosts simply acknowledged their presence without malice. One woman visiting during daylight said she heard soft humming coming from the trees, a tune she later recognized as an old prison work song recorded in the 1930s. It wasn't sad, she said. It was like they were still working, still singing, because that's all they ever knew. But for most who come here, the experience is deeply unsettling. The oppressive silence, the sensation of unseen eyes watching from the tree line, the sudden chill that cuts through humid air. All these signs hint at something unresolved. The men buried in Eastham Cemetery were forgotten by history, their names lost in records, and their deaths unmarked by family or faith. Yet the energy of their struggle, their pain, seems to linger like a permanent stain on the soil. Today, the Eastham Unit still operates, but few inmates or guards speak of the cemetery nearby. Those who know its history prefer to leave it undisturbed. At night, when the moon is low and the fields are cloaked in mist, shadows can sometimes be seen moving among the gravestones, long lines of ghostly figures marching through the darkness, their steps silent, their burdens invisible. Huntsville, Texas, known as the heart of the Texas prison system, carries a reputation built on punishment, justice, and an unending shadow of death. With more than a century of incarceration history, multiple prison units, execution chambers, and sprawling cemeteries, it's no wonder the city is often called the Eternal Prison. Locals and visitors alike whispered that the spirits of inmates who met their end here never truly left. They wander the halls, the fields, and even the streets, bound to the place that defined their final moments. The city's haunted identity begins with the Huntsville Unit, the oldest prison in Texas. Known simply as the Walls. Built in 1849, it has witnessed every shade of human suffering, from public hangings in the 19th century to the modern electric chair and lethal injection. Its execution chamber is infamous. Hundreds of men have drawn their last breath within those walls, their names recorded, their spirits perhaps not so easily erased. Guards who have worked there speak of sudden temperature drops and the faint echo of footsteps pacing in empty corridors. Even when the chamber is silent, the air hums with something heavy, an unseen presence that seems to remember. But Huntsville's ghostly reputation extends far beyond the walls. Within the city limits are several other prison units: the Wynn Unit, the Ellis Unit, the Goree Unit, the Bird Unit, and more. Together, they form a network of confinement so vast that nearly every corner of Huntsville has felt the touch of the incarcerated. It's said that, on misty nights, when the air is thick and still, the faint sound of clanging metal gates and distant voices can be heard drifting through the city, as if the entire town itself has become one massive eternal penitentiary. The Wynn Unit, just north of the city center, is one of the most frequently reported haunted sites. Built in the 1880s, it has seen countless acts of violence, escapes, and riots. Paranormal investigators who toured the facility claim to capture eerie photographs of shadowy figures standing in the corners of deserted wings. The temperature in some areas reportedly drops by 10 degrees without explanation. Guards speak of hearing whispering voices while doing night rounds, murmurs that fade as soon as lights are turned on. Some say the spirits here are not vengeful, but restless, doomed to replay their final moments over and over again. Nearby lies the Ellis Unit, another prison steeped in darkness. Once the home of Texas death row, Ellis holds a particularly grim energy. Before executions were moved to Huntsville's Walls Unit, inmates spent their final days here, awaiting the inevitable call. Staff have reported seeing phantom figures sitting on bunks in empty cells. or hearing the metallic creak of cell doors opening on their own. Some visitors claim to hear faint sobbing or the sound of men praying in voices that do not belong to the living. It's said that the execution-bound inmates of Ellis never found peace. Their despair anchored them to the very place they once waited for death. And then there is the Goree Unit, a women's prison whose history carries its own sorrow. Once home to hundreds of female inmates, it became infamous for stories of loneliness, heartbreak, and abuse. Late-night workers say they've seen women in period uniforms walking silently down hallways, vanishing when approached. A few have even reported smelling old perfume in rooms long abandoned. The energy there feels different, softer, yet deeply tragic, as though the walls themselves have absorbed decades of tears. Beyond the prisons, Huntsville's haunted story continues into the cemeteries, quiet places where the echoes of this sorrow still breathe. The most famous is Captain Joe Bird Cemetery, a burial ground for inmates who died behind bars and were never claimed by family. Thousands of numbered graves line the hillside, stretching into the distance like an ocean of forgotten lives. The markers are plain, but many believe the souls resting beneath them have not yet found peace. Visitors often report seeing glowing orbs drifting among the headstones or hearing soft whispers when the wind dies down. Some have even claimed to see shadowy figures kneeling beside the graves, only to vanish when approached. At night, the cemetery feels alive with quiet motion. The trees creak as if under invisible weight, and the faint hum of the nearby prison mixes with the sound of footsteps crunching through grass, footsteps that belong to no one. Those who have dared to spend a night there often leave shaken. One ghost hunter recalled recording faint voices that seemed to repeat a single phrase, "Still here." Another investigator's camera captured the image of a man in striped prison clothing standing among the graves, a man who wasn't there a moment before or after the photo was taken. Even outside the prisons and cemeteries, Huntsville carries its hauntings into the everyday world. Locals say the entire town vibrates with a strange, heavy energy. Late at night, some residents hear the faint echo of sirens or chains clattering in the distance, even when no one is near. Taxi drivers have reported picking up passengers who vanish before reaching their destinations, men who look tired, wearing faded prison uniforms, and who leave behind only the scent of sweat and iron. A few claim that these ghostly riders appear most often near the prison walls, as though still trying to find their way out. The execution chamber itself, located inside the Huntsville Unit, is perhaps the most haunted spot of all. Those who have entered it, guards, chaplains, and maintenance workers, speak of the same unnerving sensations. The air feels thick, the temperature drops without warning, and the silence seems to hum with a low, electric tension. One former guard recalled hearing a faint voice whisper his name, though he was completely alone. Another swore that he felt a sudden gust of cold air rush past him as he locked the chamber door, as if someone unseen had just walked out. There are even stories of figures appearing near the execution chamber's window, where witnesses once stood to observe the final moments of the condemned. Some say they see shapes moving behind the glass, though the room is empty. Others feel the overwhelming sense that they're being watched, even in daylight. Those who worked in that part of the prison for years say you never get used to it. You just learn not to look too long at the shadows. Huntsville's haunted legacy isn't one born from imagination or superstition, but from the very real weight of human suffering. For more than a century, this city has been a place of endings, for freedom, for hope, and for life itself. Thousands of souls have passed through its walls, many unwillingly, some unjustly, and countless without closure. The energy they left behind has soaked into the soil, into the brick, into the air that still hums with their memory. Visitors who come seeking proof often find something more subtle. Not always a ghostly figure or a chilling sound, but a presence. A weight pressing on the shoulders. A whisper at the edge of hearing. A shadow that seems to move when you're not looking. Huntsville doesn't scream its hauntings. It breathes them. Every corner of the town carries a reminder of those who lived and died behind bars. Texas haunted prisons are more than old buildings with iron bars. They are vessels of pain, despair, and unresolved anger. From the echoing corridors of Huntsville to the desolate grounds of Eastham, each prison holds its own dark legacy, whispering stories of those who suffered behind walls they could never escape. If you ever find yourself near one of these haunted sites, remember, these walls have memories, and some voices never fade. The spirits of Texas prisoners may be restless, but they are always watching, waiting for the curious to listen too closely. Thank you for joining me on this journey into Texas' darkest corners. If you enjoyed this chilling exploration, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell, because there are more haunted stories waiting, and some of them may be closer than you think. Until next time, keep your lights on and your ears open.